Hey there, tonight we're exploring the evolution of American homes from 1900 to 1960, where the truth is, these homes went from outhouses to indoor plumbing. No more midnight sprints through the backyard. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now make yourself cozy, maybe adjust your room temperature or get that cup of tea, and let's explore tonight's tale together. The year 1900, when modern convenience meant not having to share your bed with 3 siblings or a cow. The average American home back then was a delightful mix of practicality and, let's be honest, potential fire hazards. Forget the open concept floor plans and stainless steel appliances of today. Back then, a home was more like a fortress against the elements, with just enough space to keep the weather, and perhaps the in-laws, outside. Let's zoom in on the humble abode that cost around $3,000. Adjusted for inflation, that's roughly $95,000 today, a steal compared to modern real estate, unless you're buying a mailbox in San Francisco. This hefty sum bought you a charming, though by today's standards, minimalist dwelling. The typical home was about 1,000 square feet, and before you ask, no, it didn't come with a bathroom. Indoor plumbing was still the stuff of dreams for many, and most Americans made do with outhouses. Yes, outhouses, a structure so iconic it's practically a national symbol of rugged individualism. Now, let's talk kitchens. This was the era of the coal-fired stove, a marvel of engineering that doubled as a space heater and an accidental indoor barbecue when things got out of hand. Cooking on these beasts required a PhD in both chemistry and patience. The absence of electricity meant that everything, from your morning coffee to your evening roast, was cooked by fire, bringing a whole new meaning to cooking with gas. Speaking of electricity, or the lack thereof, homes were lit by candles or oil lamps, making every dinner a candle-lit affair. Romantic, right? Until you remember that those flickering flames were also a constant threat of turning your home into a blazing inferno. The risk of fire was so real that many homeowners kept sand buckets handy for emergencies, and perhaps as an excuse to practice their sandcastle skills indoors. It's worth noting that despite these challenges, the average American home was a symbol of progress and prosperity. Owning a home in 1900 meant you were part of the burgeoning middle class, a group growing faster than your uncle's collection of novelty ties. The U.S. economy was booming, thanks in part to the Industrial Revolution, and with it came the rise of consumerism. People were starting to buy things not just because they needed them, but because they wanted them. A revolutionary concept, indeed. But let's not get too swept up in nostalgia, because the reality for many was far from glamorous. The romanticized image of a cozy family gathered around the hearth often glosses over the fact that these homes were cramped, cold, and could be downright uncomfortable. Without insulation, winters were brutal, and summers were sticky endurance tests where even a slight breeze felt like a gift from the heavens. Despite these conditions, the American home was undeniably a center of life and activity. Social norms dictated that homes were private sanctuaries, but they also served as venues for social gatherings. The front porch was the original social media platform, where neighbors exchanged news, gossip, and the occasional pie recipe. It was a simpler time when a handshake was the equivalent of a Facebook friend request. In this era, a home wasn't just a place to lay your head. It was a status symbol, an investment, and a testament to one's hard work. It was where children were raised, meals were shared, and dreams were dreamed, often under the watchful eye of a stern family portrait that seemed to judge your every move. Each home had its own stories, woven into the fabric of American life as tightly as grandma's quilt. As we examine these home dynamics, it's also crucial to acknowledge the socio-political backdrop of 1900. America was on the cusp of the progressive era, a time of significant social change and reform. Issues like workers' rights, women's suffrage, and public health were beginning to take center stage. The home, as the cornerstone of society, was both a beneficiary of these changes and a catalyst for them. The push for better living conditions and infrastructure improvements gained momentum, driven by the understanding that a healthy home environment was essential for a healthy society. In conclusion, while the American home in 1900 may seem primitive by today's standards, it was a pivotal element in the tapestry of American life. Each coal-fired stove, each flickering candle, and each drafty window tells a story of resilience, adaptation, and the relentless pursuit of a better life. The home was more than just a structure. It was a testament to the era's innovation and ambition, laying the groundwork for the comforts and conveniences we often take for granted today. So, as you snuggle into your memory foam mattress tonight, spare a thought for those turn-of-the-century pioneers who paved the way, one coal-fired meal at a time. The Roaring Twenties, a time when jazz was hot, flappers were scandalous, and the Charleston was the tick-tock dance challenge of the day. It was a decade that practically screamed modernity. Yet ironically, it was also when Americans began to crave simpler, more affordable homes. Gone were the days of the Victorian mansion, with its labyrinthine rooms and decorative excess. Enter the bungalow, a cozy, single-story marvel that offered a more streamlined, cost-effective lifestyle. Imagine trading in your grandmother's elaborate lace doilies for a sleek, modern couch you could actually sit on without fear of breaking family heirlooms. Bungalows, with their low-pitched roofs and open floor plans, became the architectural equivalent of a comfortable pair of jeans, something that fit easily into the lives of the burgeoning middle class. And here's the kicker: they were affordable. At a time when the average income was about $1,500 a year, a bungalow might set you back $2,000 to $4,000. That's a far cry from the earlier Victorian homes, where the cost of upkeep alone could rival the GDP of a small nation. But for those who wanted to take DIY to the next level, there were Sears catalog homes. Yes, folks, long before Amazon Prime, you could actually order your house through a catalog. From 1908 to 1940, Sears, Roebuck & Co. offered kit homes, which came with everything you needed, from lumber to nails, delivered right to your plot of land. Prices ranged from $600 to $500, depending on the model. It was like IKEA, but instead of struggling to assemble a coffee table, you were building a whole house. Talk about a weekend project. These homes were the epitome of practicality and innovation. And let's not forget the real game changer: indoor plumbing. By the 1920s, the idea of not trekking to an outhouse in the dead of winter became not just a luxury, but an expectation. Suddenly, the bathroom wasn't just the most important room in the house. It was a status symbol. If you had running water and a flush toilet, you were practically living in the lap of luxury. It was like having the latest iPhone. Everyone wanted it, and those who had it couldn't stop talking about it. Electricity also started to light up homes across America, quite literally. By the end of the decade, about 70% of urban households had electric power, turning what was once a flickering candlelit dinner into a brightly illuminated affair. Electric lights were the new standard, and with them came a slew of new appliances. The washing machine, for instance, freed housewives from the weekly laundry drudgery, and the electric refrigerator put an end to the dubious joys of the icebox. Talk about progress. Yet, amidst all this prosperity, the Great Depression loomed like a bad smell you couldn't quite place. The stock market crash of 1929 sent shockwaves through the economy, turning boom into bust almost overnight. Unemployment rates skyrocketed to a staggering 25%, and suddenly that shiny new bungalow felt more like a financial albatross. People lost their jobs, their savings, and sometimes even their homes. It was a harsh reminder that economic prosperity was as unpredictable as a weather forecast. This era highlighted the peculiar marriage of prosperity and poverty. On one hand, you had the modern conveniences that made life easier and more comfortable for those who could afford them. On the other hand, the economic crash exposed the fragility of this newfound modern lifestyle. It was the ultimate irony. Just as homes were becoming more efficient and affordable, millions of Americans found themselves without the means to maintain even the most basic standard of living. The impact of the Great Depression on American homes is a study in contrasts. Some families doubled up, with multiple generations living under one roof to save on costs. Others took to the road, becoming part of the Great Migration in search of work, a place to live, or just a little bit of hope. The American dream had always been about owning a home, But the reality was that for many, this dream was slipping further out of reach. Yet, despite these economic hardships, the innovation didn't stop. The New Deal programs introduced by President Franklin D. Roosevelt aimed to revitalize the economy and, by extension, the housing market. Initiatives like the Federal Housing Administration, FHA, made home loans more accessible, stabilizing the housing industry and laying the groundwork for post-war prosperity. It was a time of reconstruction, both literally and figuratively, as America sought to rebuild not just homes, but lives and communities. Let's not sugarcoat it, though. The transition from the opulence of the Roaring Twenties to the stark realities of the Great Depression was anything but smooth. The economic pendulum swung wildly, leaving many to wonder if they were living in the best of times or the worst. Yet through it all, one thing remained constant. The home was still at the center of American life. It was where families gathered, where hopes were nurtured, and where the spirit of resilience shone brightly against the backdrop of uncertainty. In examining this period, it's essential to remember that the American home was more than just bricks and mortar. It was a reflection of the times, a canvas upon which the ever-shifting social, economic, and political landscapes were painted. The bungalow and the Sears catalog home were not merely architectural trends. They were symbols of a society striving to balance tradition with modernity, luxury with affordability, and individual aspirations with collective realities. As we continue our journey through the evolution of the American home, we'll see how these lessons in resilience and adaptation carried forward into the mid-20th century. The stage was set for a new era, one that would redefine not just what a home looked like, but what it meant to live in one. So, as we bid adieu to the tumultuous 1930 and prepare to step into the next chapter, let's take a moment to appreciate the ingenuity and grit that characterized this transformative period. Stay tuned, because the story of the American home is far from over. As we leave the tumultuous 1930s behind and step into the 1940s, America finds itself on the brink of a post-war transformation. Picture this. The roaring engines of planes have quieted, the battlefields are beginning to heal, and the doughboys are coming home, not just with stories of valor, but with a government-sanctioned ticket to the American dream. Enter the GI Bill, a piece of legislation that might as well come with a cape. This little legal powerhouse didn't just change the lives of veterans, it changed the entire landscape of American housing. Now, the GI Bill, officially known as the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944, was more than a pat on the back for a job well done. It was a comprehensive package of benefits aimed at helping returning World War II veterans reintegrate into civilian life. Among its many gifts was the low-interest, zero-down-payment home loan. This provision turned the American dream of owning a home from a distant fantasy into a reachable reality for millions of servicemen. It was like Oprah was handing out deeds. You get a house, and you get a house. But let's pump the brakes and talk numbers. In 1940, the median home price was about $2,938. Let's call it $3,000 just to keep it simple. Adjusted for inflation, that's roughly $56,000 today. By 1950, the cost of a new home had risen to just over $8,000, or about $90,000 in contemporary dollars. This increase wasn't just due to inflation. It was fueled by a surge in demand as veterans rushed to claim their piece of the suburban pie. And who was slicing up those pies? A man named William Levitt, the undisputed king of post-war suburbia. Levittown, USA. A name that conjures images of white picket fences, manicured lawns, and identical homes lined up like soldiers at attention. Built between 1947 and 1951 in New York, Levittown was the brainchild of William Levitt, a real estate developer who saw an opportunity and grabbed it with both hands and probably a few bulldozers. Levitt's assembly line approach to construction, think Henry Ford but with bricks, allowed him to build homes faster and cheaper than ever before. At its peak, Levittown offered homes for as little as $8,000, a bargain that included a white picket fence, a lawn, and even kitchen appliances. This wasn't just a housing development. It was a phenomenon, the suburban answer to the question of where America was headed. Yet, all that glitters isn't gold, and Levittown was no exception. The community was a symbol of prosperity and modernity, but but it also laid bare the racial and economic inequalities simmering beneath America's polished facade. You see, Levittown was open to veterans, but only if they were white. The leases came with a strict Caucasians-only clause, making it a suburban utopia that was anything but universal. While the GI Bill was breaking barriers for some, it was reinforcing them for others. African-American veterans found themselves largely shut out of the benefits their white counterparts enjoyed. Loan officers and real estate agents practiced redlining, a discriminatory policy that effectively barred non-white families from buying homes in burgeoning suburbs like Levittown. The systemic racism was as clear as the freshly painted fences, creating a divide that would take decades to address. The explosive growth of suburbia, fueled by the GI Bill and the post-war baby boom, wasn't just about housing. It was a cultural shift. The idea of the nuclear family living in a detached single-family home became the new American ideal. The suburbs offered more than just a roof over one's head. They promised a lifestyle, a community, and a sense of security that seemed to echo the patriotic promise of a better tomorrow. Yet, this promise was a double-edged sword, as it also deepened the chasm between the haves and the have-nots. In the years following World War II, the U.S. population grew by over 14 million, and the suburbs absorbed a significant chunk of this increase. Between 1947 and 1953, the suburbs expanded 10 times faster than cities. By 1960, one-third of Americans called the suburbs home. But these weren't just any homes. They were cookie-cutter castles of post-war bliss. Each house looked like its neighbor, which looked like its neighbor's neighbor, creating a landscape so uniform that getting lost on your way home was a real possibility unless you counted mailboxes or lawn gnomes as landmarks. Suburbia wasn't just shaping the landscape, it was reshaping the American psyche. It introduced the concept of keeping up with the Joneses, where families competed to have the latest gadgets, the greenest lawns, and the happiest households. It was a pressure cooker of social expectations, and if you didn't have a 2-car garage and a barbecue grill, were you even trying? The suburbs became a stage for the performance of prosperity, where appearances were as important as reality. But while the suburbs promised a slice of the good life, they often delivered a side of isolation. The move away from urban centers meant that many families found themselves cut off from the vibrant, diverse communities they once knew. Car culture took over, and suddenly, walking to the store or commuting to work meant harping into a gas-guzzling metal box. The American dream came with a roadmap, one that often led away from the close-knit neighborhoods of the past and toward a more solitary existence. As the 1950s rolled in, the Eisenhower administration took the suburban expansion to a whole new level with the interstate highway system. Signed into law in 1956, this network of roads didn't just connect cities. It connected the darts of suburban sprawl, turning commutes into a daily reality for millions. The highways were arteries pumping life into the suburbs, but they were also conduits for congestion and pollution. The car became king, and if you didn't have one, well, you were stuck on the throne of inconvenience. And let's not forget the baby boomers, the generation that seemed to arrive en masse as if storks had formed an airlift operation. Between 1946 and 1964, nearly 76 million babies were born in the United States, a demographic tidal wave that shaped everything from housing demand to advertising. Suburbs became the playgrounds of these new arrivals, the backdrop for the sitcoms of real life. They were the places where the future was being molded, one backyard baseball game at a time. Yet, underneath the surface of this booming prosperity lay the persistent undercurrent of inequality. The post-war economic boom didn't touch everyone equally, and the suburbs, for all their promise, were a stark reminder of the divisions that still existed. The idyllic image of a suburban paradise was a myth that glossed over the realities of discrimination, economic disparity, and social stratification. The 1940s and 50s were a time of transformation, but they were also a period of reckoning. The American home was evolving, shaped by legislation, innovation, and a society in flux. As we prepare to step into the next era, it's crucial to remember that the story of the American home is not just about bricks and mortar. It's about the people who lived within those walls and the dreams they pursued. So, as we leave this chapter behind, Keep your eyes on the horizon, because the journey through America's residential evolution is far from over. Stay tuned for the next installment, where we'll continue to unravel the tapestry of American life, one house at a time. As we leave the post-war transformation era behind, let's dive headlong into the 1950, a time when America was not just building houses, but entire lifestyles. This was the golden age of the ranch-style home, a sprawling architectural design that screamed mid-century modernity and whispered a silent prayer for fewer stairs. Born out of a desire for open spaces and sprawling lawns, these homes were the physical manifestation of the American dream, a dream that, much like your neighbor's barbecue, had a tendency to drift into everyone else's yard. The ranch-style home wasn't just a place to hang your hat. It was an emblem of the newfound prosperity that defined the decade. Between 1950 and 1960, the number of single-family homes in the U.S. skyrocketed by over 20 million. These homes typically boasted between 200 and 500 square feet of space, a real step up from the cramped quarters of yesteryear. And at an average cost of about $11,000, these ranch houses were relatively affordable, assuming you could swing the $1,500 annual mortgage payments. This was the heyday of homeownership, where the only thing more American than apple pie was having a garage to park your new Chevy. Speaking of which, the 1950s were when Americans really fell head over heels for the automobile, like teenagers with a garage band and a dream. The number of registered vehicles in the U.S. doubled from 25 million in 1945 to over 60 million by the end of the decade. Cars were no longer just transportation. They were status symbols, mobile lounges, and occasionally the site of clandestine teenage rendezvous. The automobile dictated where Americans lived, how they shopped, and even how they socialized. Drive-in theaters and drive-through diners popped up like mushrooms after a rainstorm, catering to a culture that was always on the move. Television also barged into the American living room, rearranging family dynamics and furniture alike. By 1960, nearly 90% of U.S. households owned a TV set, turning the once simple act of sitting down into a nightly ritual of communal viewing. TV dinners became a thing, mostly because they allowed families to eat in front of the tube without the hassle of balancing plates on their knees. The boob tube did more than entertain. It influenced everything from fashion to politics, injecting a new kind of connectivity into the suburban sprawl. But let's hit pause on this idyllic image for a moment. While the 1950s were painted in technicolor glory, the decade had its fair share of gray areas. The specter of McCarthyism loomed large, a political witch hunt that turned neighbor against neighbor and made paranoia the national pastime. The Red Scare wasn't just a chapter in history books. It was a plot twist in the soap opera of American life. The fear of communism infiltrating everyday life was so pervasive that fallout shelters became almost as popular as backyard pools. These bunkers were the ultimate home improvement project, complete with canned goods, Geiger counters, and the uneasy hope that they'd never be used. The Cold War was the backdrop to all these domestic developments, a tense chess match where the stakes were nuclear. The threat of atomic warfare was a constant drumbeat, and it played out in the most bizarre ways. Schoolchildren practiced duck and cover drills, as if crouching under a desk could somehow shield them from a mushroom cloud. It was a time when the existential dread of global conflict was juxtaposed against the chirpy optimism of suburban life, a duality that was as confusing as it was compelling. As we continue to peel back the layers of 1950s America, it's impossible to ignore the cultural and societal shifts that were bubbling beneath the surface. The decade wasn't just about the white picket fence. It was about questioning whose fence it was and who had the right to build it. The civil rights movement was gaining momentum, challenging the status quo and demanding a re-evaluation of what it meant to be all-American. While some Americans were busy building bomb shelters, others were marching for equality, proving that the only thing more powerful than fear is the desire for justice. The 1950 also saw the rise of consumer culture, a phenomenon that turned shopping into a national pastime. The introduction of the credit card in 1950 by Diners Club was a game-changer, making it easier than ever for Americans to buy now and pay later. This newfound financial flexibility helped fuel an economic boom, but it also sowed the seeds for future debt crises. The allure of easy credit was irresistible, and it transformed the landscape of retail, giving birth to the shopping mall, a temple to consumerism where every purchase felt like a victory. But let's not get carried away on a wave of nostalgia. While the 1950s are often romanticized as a simpler time, the reality was anything but. Beneath the veneer of prosperity and progress lurked issues that were anything but black and white. The decade was a complex tapestry of contradictions, where the promise of a better tomorrow was constantly at odds with the challenges of the present. It was a time when the American dream felt both within reach and impossibly distant, depending on who you were and where you stood. As we continue to journey through the annals of American home life, keep in mind that history is not just a series of dates and events. It's a reflection of human nature in all its messy, contradictory glory. The 1950s were a period of great transformation, but also of great tension, a decade that laid the groundwork for the seismic shifts that would follow. So stay tuned, because the story of how American homes changed isn't just about bricks and mortar. It's about the people who lived within those walls and the dreams they dared to dream. Keep your eyes peeled for the next installment, where we'll continue to explore the intricate tapestry of American life, one house at a time. But let's fast forward to the cusp of the 1960s, where America was teetering on the edge of a revolution that would shake the very foundations of suburban bliss. The 1960s were poised to be a decade where technology, design, and social attitudes would converge to redefine what it meant to live the American dream. It was the calm before the storm, where the familiar hum of a kitchen blender would soon be drowned out by the roar of cultural upheaval. First, let's talk technology. By the late 1950s, the American home was starting to look like a scene from the Jetsons, minus the flying cars. The average household was becoming a veritable gadget gallery, with newfangled appliances promising to turn homemakers into domestic deities. Dishwashers, electric ranges, and even the mighty microwave were making their grand entrance into kitchens across the country. By 1965, roughly 60% of American homes had dishwashers, a device that promised to eliminate the age-old debate of who was on dish duty. The microwave, introduced in 1967, was a true game-changer. A hefty $495, about $4,000 today, it was a luxury few could afford, but it tantalized the masses with the promise of a 3-minute TV dinner. These innovations weren't just about convenience, they were about redefining domestic life. The post-war era had taught Americans to crave efficiency, and by the dawn of the 1960s, the household was a machine meant to run smoothly and swiftly. The irony, of course, was that all this time-saving technology often left people with more time to fill and less idea of how to fill it. The very gadgets meant to connect families often isolated them in their individual routines, a paradox that would only grow as the years rolled on. In terms of design, the 1960s saw a departure from the cookie-cutter conformity of the previous decade. Mid-century modernism was in full swing, with architects like Richard Neutra and Charles Eames redefining residential architecture. Think open floor plans, large glass windows, and a seamless connection between indoor and outdoor spaces. This wasn't just about aesthetics. It was about a philosophical shift towards minimalism and functionality. The ranch-style homes of the 1950s were evolving, shedding their suburban skins for something sleeker and more sophisticated. It was like trading in a Buick for a Corvette, a bold move that left some neighbors in awe and others in envy. Yet, while designs were becoming more daring, the social fabric of America was being stretched to its limits. The 1960s were a hotbed of social change, and the American home was both a refuge from and a mirror to the turbulence outside. As civil rights activists marched for equality, and the counterculture movement questioned every norm, the question of what constituted a home was up for debate. The traditional nuclear family model was being scrutinized, and with it, the very concept of domestic bliss was being redefined. It was as if the walls of the home were expanding, trying to contain the complexity of a world in flux. Economically, the 1960s were a mixed bag. The early part of the decade saw prosperity, with the median family income rising from $5,620 in 1950 to $7,700 by 1960. But this boom wasn't universal. The gap between the wealthy and the poor was widening, and not everyone was reaping the benefits of the so-called affluent society. The suburbs were still the epitome of middle-class success, but the inner cities were struggling. Urban decay and poverty were becoming more visible, challenging the idyllic images of American life that television and advertising were so eager to promote. And speaking of advertising, the 1960s brought a new level of sophistication to the art of selling. Madison Avenue was in its heyday, crafting campaigns that sold not just products, but lifestyles. The home was the ultimate stage for these aspirational tales, where the latest appliance or furniture set promised to transform not just your living room, but your life. In reality, these advertisements often masked deeper societal issues, offering a veneer of perfection that few could achieve. It was the era of Mad Men, where the line between fantasy and reality blurred like a watercolor left out in the rain. As America stood on the brink of the 1960s, the stage was set for a decade that would redefine every aspect of life, from the way we lived to what we valued. The American home, once a bastion of stability, was now a reflection of a society grappling with change. The innovations in technology and design promised a brighter, more efficient future, but they also highlighted the growing chasm between different segments of the population. The home was both a sanctuary and a battleground, a place where the echoes of protest and progress reverberated through every room. Looking back, the evolution of the American home from 1900 to 1960 is a testament to the resilience and adaptability of the American spirit. Each decade brought its own challenges and triumphs, shaping not just the physical structure of homes, but the lives of those who inhabited them. From the humble, drafty abodes of the early 20th century to the sleek, gadget-filled dwellings of the 1960s, the journey is one of innovation, aspiration, and at times, contradiction. As we wrap up this exploration, it's worth reflecting on the legacy of these changes. The American home has always been more than just a collection of bricks and mortar. It's a reflection of our values, our dreams, and our struggles. It's where we gather, where we retreat, and where we plot our futures. The homes of the past laid the groundwork for the comforts and conveniences we enjoy today, but they also remind us that progress is a double-edged sword, capable of both connecting and isolating us. So, as you lean back in your ergonomically designed chair or snuggle under your weighted blanket, take a moment to appreciate the journey. The story of the American home is far from over, but it's a tale that continues to unfold, one square foot at a time. Whether you're a fan of mid-century modern or prefer the charm of a Victorian-era Carthage, remember that each home is a chapter in a larger narrative, one that reflects the ever-evolving story of who we are and who we aspire to be. In the beginning, there was a city that no one expected to become a powerhouse, a place that slapped the Mediterranean world awake with its audacity and ambition. Welcome to Carthage, the ultimate underdog story from antiquity. It's not just a city, not just a trading post. Carthage was the ancient equivalent of a Silicon Valley startup that went global. But before we get to its glory days, let's rewind the historical tape and check out its roots, which are as Phoenician as hummus and cedar ships. Founded in the 9th century BCE, Carthage was the brainchild of the Phoenicians, those ancient mariners who could sell sand in a desert. These folks hailed from the coastal cities of what we now call Lebanon, known for their seafaring skills and a penchant for trade that bordered on obsessive. The Phoenicians were like the Amazon prime of the ancient world, delivering goods faster than you could say, Tyrian purple. And speaking of Tyrian purple, let's talk about that for a minute. This dye, extracted from the murex snail, was the color of royalty and came with a price tag to match. Imagine selling a color for more than its weight in gold. Now that's branding for you. The Phoenicians were marketing geniuses long before digital ads were a thing. So why Carthage? Geography, my friends, geography. Nestled on the coast of present-day Tunisia, Carthage had one of those locations that real estate agents dream about. With a natural harbor that would make any sailor swoon, it was perfectly positioned to control trade routes across the Mediterranean. Think of it as the Panama Canal of its day, except with fewer larks and more olive oil amphorae. The city's strategic position allowed it to become a bustling hub, as critical to trade as Wi-Fi is to millennials. But let's not romanticize it too much. The Phoenicians didn't choose Carthage just because it was a pretty spot to set up shop. No, they were driven by necessity. The competition back home was fierce, and expansion was the name of the game. Imagine their homeland as a cramped Silicon Valley garage and Carthage as the shiny new office. It was a fresh start with endless possibilities. Now, about that urban planning. Carthage was laid out with the kind of foresight that would make a modern city planner weep tears of joy or rage, depending on their disposition. The city was built on a grid pattern, which sounds mundane until you realize this was centuries before the Romans started paving roads and building aqueducts. It had 2 harbors, one for trade and one for military purposes. Talk about efficient multitasking. This setup allowed Carthage to juggle commerce and defense like a pro, which was crucial because, in the ancient world, a city without walls and warships was just a sitting duck. But how did this Phoenician outpost transform into a Mediterranean powerhouse? The answer lies in its culture of enterprise. The Carthaginians inherited their forebears' knack for trade and took it to a whole new level. They weren't just middlemen. They were innovators. Their ships crisscrossed the Mediterranean, carrying not only goods, but also ideas and innovations, making Carthage a melting pot long before the term was coined. Carthage's economic engine was fueled by its ability to exploit natural resources and its strategic location. From silver to slaves, grain to garum, that deliciously pungent fish sauce, the Carthaginians traded in everything that could turn a profit. They even had a foothold in the Iberian Peninsula, rich in minerals, which was the ancient world's equivalent of a gold rush. This network of trade routes made Carthage fabulously wealthy, allowing it to fund a standing army and a formidable navy. The city wasn't just rich, it was powerful, and power, as we know, has a way of inviting rivals. As Carthage grew, its influence spread like wildfire, sparking envy and fear among its neighbors. The Greeks called them the Purple People due to their association with the dye, albeit with a hint of disdain, like calling a fashion mogul a label junkie. But for the Carthaginians, the nickname was a badge of honor, a testament to their economic prowess. They had transformed a humble outpost into an empire, and they weren't about to let anyone forget it. Yet, it's easy to get swept up in the romantic allure of Carthage's rise without acknowledging the sweat and savvy it took to get there. The reality was a constant hustle, a relentless pursuit of opportunity in a world where fortune favored the bold, and often the ruthless. Carthage was no utopia. It was a competitive, cutthroat society that thrived on commerce and conflict alike. So, as we wrap up this chapter of Carthage's origin story, remember that what started as a Phoenician pit-stop blossomed into a Mediterranean giant through sheer grit and geographical genius. It's a tale of ambition and adaptability, a lesson in how to turn a little into a lot, all while keeping an eye on the ever-present threat of rivals lurking just beyond the horizon. Stay tuned, because the drama of Carthage is just getting started. So, with Carthage flexing its economic muscles and eyeing the horizon like a hawk searching for its next meal, it was only a matter of time before they turned their gaze seaward. Enter the Carthaginian navy, a force that would come to dominate the Mediterranean with all the subtlety of a Viking raid. But how did a city that started as a humble Phoenician colony become the maritime juggernaut that even the Romans had to reckon with? Well, it all started with ships. Lots and lots of ships. Let's get one thing straight. Carthage didn't just have a navy. They had a floating armada that could make Poseidon himself break into a sweat. At the heart of this sea power lay the quinquereme, a vessel that sounds like something out of a sci-fi epic, but was very much a product of its time. Named for its 5 rows of oars, this beast of a ship was the equivalent of an ancient battleship, capable of carrying about 300 men, including 120 rowers. It was a marvel of engineering, designed for speed and maneuverability, and it showed that Carthage didn't just want to play in the big leagues. They wanted to rewrite the rulebook. The Carthaginians took their shipbuilding seriously, and they weren't afraid to borrow ideas from their enemies. The quinquereme itself was an adaptation of Greek and Phoenician designs, but Carthage added its own flair, much like a chef tweaking a classic recipe to perfection. The result was a fleet that could outpace and outmaneuver most adversaries, turning the Mediterranean into their personal playground. But having a fleet of fast ships is only part of the equation. You also need the tactics to use them effectively, and here Carthage truly shone. Their strategy was all about ramming and boarding, a kind of maritime smash and grab that prioritized close combat over long-range duels. In essence, they were the pirates of their day, minus the parrots and eye patches. The Carthaginians excelled in using the corvus, a boarding device that was essentially a giant plank with a spike on the end. When lowered onto an enemy ship, it acted like a medieval drawbridge, allowing Carthaginian marines to pour onto the decks of their foes like ants at a picnic. But even the Carthaginians couldn't escape the occasional maritime misstep. Their naval dominance wasn't always smooth sailing, and they had their fair share of what can only be described as ancient corporate blunders. Take, for example, the infamous Battle of Mylae in 260 BCE during the First Punic War. It was Carthage's first major naval engagement against Rome, and well, let's just say it didn't go according to plan. Despite their superior ships, the Carthaginians underestimated the Romans, who, by the way, had never been particularly known for their naval prowess. Yet the Romans had a not-so-secret weapon, the corvus. Yes, the Romans had taken a page out of Carthage's own playbook, modifying it to create their own version of the boarding device. Talk about a strategic facepalm. The result? A Roman victory that left Carthaginian commanders scratching their heads and possibly questioning their career choices. It was a classic case of hubris meeting its match, and it showed that even the most powerful navy could be outsmarted if they weren't paying attention. It's the kind of tactical blunder that modern business schools might dissect as a lesson in the dangers of complacency. Yet, despite setbacks like Mylae, Carthage's navy remained a force to be reckoned with for decades, thanks in no small part to the meticulous logistics that went into maintaining such a vast fleet. Building and maintaining ships required resources, lots of them, and Carthage was nothing if not resourceful. Timber, metals, and skilled labor were all part of the complex supply chain that kept the quinquiremes battle-ready. The city even had an intricate naval yard known as the Carthon, a circular harbor that served as the nerve center for shipbuilding and repairs. Imagine a military-industrial complex before the term existed, humming with activity day and night to keep the fleet in fighting shape. Of course, no discussion of Carthaginian naval prowess would be complete without a nod to the tales of sea monsters that supposedly lurked beneath the waves. Ancient sailors were a superstitious lot, and the Mediterranean was ripe with stories of leviathans and krakens ready to devour ships whole. While these myths make for great campfire tales, they also reveal the very real dangers of ancient seafaring. Storms, pirates, and navigational errors were constant threats, turning every voyage into a high-stakes gamble. But for Carthage, the rewards far outweighed the risks, and they were willing to wager it all for control of the seas. So, what can we learn from Carthage's maritime dominance? For starters, innovation and adaptability are key. Whether it's tweaking ship designs or adopting new tactics, staying ahead of the curve is crucial. But perhaps the most enduring lesson is the importance of never underestimating your competition. Carthage may have ruled the waves for a time, but their failure to anticipate Roman ingenuity cost them dearly. It's a reminder that in the game of empire building, even the mightiest can fall if they let their guard down. As the sun sets on this chapter of Carthaginian history, keep in mind that the story is far from over. The sea was just one theater in Carthage's long and tumultuous saga, and the challenges they faced on land were every bit as formidable. So, stay tuned as we navigate the twists and turns of Carthage's epic tale, where the stakes only get higher and the drama more intense. Trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next. As we leave behind the salty tales of Carthage's maritime glory, let's anchor ourselves in the world of ancient trade, where the real riches flowed like wine at a Dionysian festival. You see, Carthage's knack for naval dominance wasn't just about flexing military muscle. It supported an intricate web of commerce that stretched from the mineral-rich lands of Iberia to the gold-laden shores of Africa. This was no mere trading post. It was the economic powerhouse of the ancient Mediterranean, the Wall Street of antiquity, if you will. Now, before you start romanticizing Carthaginian traders as suave adventurers, let's talk about the nitty-gritty. First up, their routes. Picture a network that could make a modern logistics manager break into a cold sweat. Carthaginian ships sailed from the Iberian Peninsula, where they loaded up on silver and tin, essential metals for everything from currency to weaponry. With the Iberian mines churning out these precious resources, Carthage could practically print money, ancient QE, minus the economists. Then there was Africa, a treasure chest of gold, ivory, and exotic animals. Carthaginian traders weren't just hauling goods, they were bringing back wealth that would make even today's billionaires do a double take. These traders navigated the perilous waters of the Mediterranean and beyond, relying on stars and maps scribbled on papyrus, pre-GPS, folks, where a cloudy night sky could turn a quick trip into a Mediterranean odyssey. But let's not overlook the trade goods themselves. Carthage had a taste for the finer things, importing luxurious goods like Egyptian papyrus and Indian spices. Their ships carried everything from the mundane, grain and olive oil, to the extravagant, like Tyrian purple dye, which, as we've established, was the Gucci of ancient colors. The city was a melting pot of products that fueled not just local markets, but far-reaching economies, making it the Amazon of the ancient world, minus the drones. Now, let's talk about the economics of this ancient enterprise, which were as complex as any modern multinational corporation. Carthaginian trade was bolstered by a sophisticated monetary system that involved the use of silver and gold coins. These coins weren't just currency, they were statements of power and influence. Minted with images of deities and symbols of Carthaginian identity, they traveled across continents, spreading the city's influence like ripples in a pond. Yet, amid all this trade, Carthage faced its fair share of headaches, those pesky supply chain issues that would make any ancient merchant groan. Pirates were the perennial thorn in the side of Carthaginian trade, roaming the seas like unwanted pop-up ads, ready to intercept and loot unwary merchant vessels. And while Carthaginian naval prowess kept these maritime bandits at bay, it was an ongoing game of cat and mouse, with shipping delays as common as ancient amphorae. Speaking of amphorae, they were the shipping containers of the ancient world, used to transport everything from olive oil to wine. Carthaginian merchants were adept at using these clay vessels, stacking them like the ultimate game of Tetris in their ship holds. The amphorae were stamped with the mark of their maker, a kind of ancient QR code, ensuring quality and origin in a world where brand reputation was everything. Carthage's trading empire was not just about moving goods, but about shaping the socio-political landscape. Their trade networks brought them into contact with various cultures, from the Greeks and Romans to the Berbers of North Africa and the Iberians. These interactions weren't always friendly. Competition was fierce, and alliances were as fragile as the clay amphorae that carried their olive oil. Carthage was a master of diplomacy when it suited them, using trade as a tool to forge alliances, and sometimes as a weapon to starve enemies of critical resources. But let's not sugarcoat it. Carthage's trade empire wasn't built on goodwill alone. They knew how to play hardball, leveraging their economic muscle to dominate regional markets. It's the kind of aggressive capitalism that would make modern tycoons nod in approval while raising a few eyebrows among the more ethically inclined. The Carthaginians were pragmatic, understanding that in the ancient world, as in ours, money talked, and those who controlled the flow of goods wielded real power. Amidst all this economic activity, Carthage also had to keep an eye on its rivals. The Greeks and Romans were always lurking, eager to snatch a piece of the lucrative Mediterranean trade pie. The competition was real, and Carthage had to be vigilant, maintaining its edge through innovation and adaptation. They understood that complacency was a luxury they couldn't afford, a lesson they learned the hard way more than once. So, as we sail through the bustling trade routes of ancient Carthage, remember that this wasn't just a tale of goods and riches. It was a saga of ambition, strategy, and survival, a reminder that in the cutthroat world of ancient commerce, only the shrewdest survived. Carthage wasn't just a player in the game. It was the game master, setting the rules and changing them as it saw fit. And while their empire eventually met its match, the legacy of their trade networks continues to intrigue and inspire, offering us a glimpse into a world where the stakes were as high as the seas were vast. Stay with us as we delve deeper into the Carthaginian saga, where the drama only intensifies, and the twists and turns of history promise to keep you on the edge of your seat. Trust me, the story is far from over, and you won't want to miss the next chapter in this epic tale of power, ambition, and the relentless pursuit of fortune. Now, let's pivot from Carthage's bustling trade routes and take a good, hard look at the gears turning within its society. Because let's face it, every empire is only as good as its inner workings. In Carthage, those gears were powered by a unique blend of oligarchic savvy and military might, and few families encapsulated this chaotic cocktail better than the Barcids. Ah, the Barcid family, a name that conjures images of glory and doom, much like a Shakespearean drama, but with more elephants and fewer soliloquies. First things first, let's dissect Carthaginian politics, which were a bit like ancient reality TV with fewer cameras, but just as many backstabbing alliances. At the top of the social ladder were the oligarchs, a group of wealthy elites who made Jeff Bezos look like a penny pincher. These folks controlled the city's purse strings, and by extension, its political agenda. The Carthaginian Senate, a powerful yet shadowy assembly, was the playground for these power brokers. Imagine a bunch of toga-clad tycoons wheeling and dealing in smoke-filled rooms, minus the cigars, but with plenty of olive oil. Yet, despite their wealth, the oligarchs knew they needed a strong military to protect their interests, and that's where the generals came in. Carthage wasn't just a merchant city, it was a military powerhouse, and generals wielded significant clout. This balance of power between oligarchs and generals created a dynamic and often dysfunctional political ecosystem. It was a bit like a high-stakes chess game, where every move mattered, and losing often meant more than just a bruised ego. Enter the Barcid family, a clan that mastered the art of navigating this treacherous political landscape. Hamilcar Barca, the patriarch, was a general with ambitions as grand as his name. Picture him as a mix of military genius and political operator. Think Julius Caesar meets Steve Jobs, but with more spears and fewer turtlenecks. Hamilcar didn't just want to win battles. He wanted to expand Carthage's influence, and he wasn't shy about using a bit of cunning to get there. Hamilcar's son, the ever-famous Hannibal, took the family legacy to a whole new level. You've heard of Hannibal, right? The guy who dragged elephants over the Alps to give Rome the shock of a lifetime. Yet, let's bust a myth or two. Hannibal's elephants, often depicted as an unstoppable force, were more like the ancient equivalent of tanks that ran out of gas halfway through the campaign. While their initial appearance was enough to make the Romans do a double-take, the reality was less glamorous. Only a handful of these mighty beasts survived the trek, leaving Hannibal's army relying more on strategic brilliance than pachyderm power. Back to the political scene, Hannibal wasn't just a military whiz. He was a diplomat and statesman, keeping the oligarchs on side while pursuing his own agenda. The Barcids understood that Carthage's strength lay in its ability to adapt, whether by forging alliances with local tribes or innovating on the battlefield. But even their genius had limits, as Hannibal discovered when the Roman war machine proved more enduring than expected. It's a classic tale of overreach, the kind that history professors love to dissect while students try not to doze off. Now, let's not forget the rest of Carthaginian society, because it wasn't all generals and oligarchs. Far from it. The city was a melting pot of cultures and classes, with a social structure as layered as a Greek lasagna. At the base were the common folk, artisans, merchants, and farmers who kept the wheels of commerce turning. These were the unsung heroes, the ones who paid the taxes and fought the wars, all while trying to make a decent living in a city that never slept. Above them were the political middlemen, a class of bureaucrats and civil servants who ensured that the oligarchs' whims translated into actionable policies. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was essential, much like the unsung IT guy who keeps your favorite streaming service running smoothly. And then there were the religious practices, a mix of reverence and spectacle that would make even the most fervent festival-goer pause. Carthage was known for its devotion to the gods, particularly Baal Hammon and Tanit, who demanded nothing less than the utmost respect, and sometimes a bit more. Yes, we're talking about those infamous child sacrifices, a topic that has sparked debate for centuries. While some historians argue these were exaggerated by Roman propaganda, archaeological evidence suggests that Carthaginians did partake in ritual sacrifices, albeit not as frequently as the Romans would have you believe. It's a grim reminder that in the ancient world, the line between devotion and brutality was often blurred. Yet, religion in Carthage wasn't all about grim rituals. It was also about community and identity. Temples were not just places of worship, but social hubs where deals were struck, gossip was exchanged, and the pulse of the city could be felt. Think of them as the coffee shops of antiquity, minus the espresso machines, but with plenty of incense and libations. So, what does all this tell us about Carthage? It was a city of contrasts, wealthy yet war-torn, devout yet pragmatic. Its society was a complex tapestry of ambition, power, and tradition, one that could unravel at any moment if pulled too tightly. The Barcids, with their audacious ventures and tragic downfalls, epitomized this complexity, reminding us that history is never as straightforward as it seems. As we wrap up this exploration of Carthaginian society, keep in mind that the story doesn't end here. There's more drama to uncover, more myths to debunk, and more lessons to learn from this ancient city that dared to challenge the might of Rome. So, stay tuned as we continue to peel back the layers of Carthage's epic saga, where each twist and turn promises to be as thrilling as the last. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's next in this incredible journey through history. Just as the curtain was about to rise on Carthage's grand finale, Rome stormed the stage with all the subtlety of a toddler in a toy shop. Enter the Punic Wars, the three-act tragedy that unfolded between 264 and 146 BCE, putting Carthage and Rome on a collision course that would end in tears, or at least a lot of scorched earth. If you ever wondered what happens when two superpowers play a game of who's the boss across the Mediterranean, this is it. First, let's set the scene with the First Punic War. Picture Carthage, that seasoned maritime juggernaut, and Rome, the land-based powerhouse with a naval strategy that could generously be called aspirational. The conflict kicked off over Sicily, a strategic location that both cities eyed like a Black Friday deal. Despite Carthage's naval prowess, Rome wasn't about to sit back and let the seas be someone else's domain. In an unexpected twist, they built a fleet from scratch, like a DIY project on a galactic scale, and even managed to snatch victory at the Battle of Mylae in 260 BCE, using that pesky Corvus boarding device. Chalk one up for Roman ingenuity or desperate improvisation, depending on how you look at it. After 23 years of sea skirmishes and land battles, the war ended with Rome's victory, a hefty Carthaginian indemnity, and Sicily becoming Rome's first overseas province. Carthage's wallet was lighter, but its spirit, not quite broken. Enter the Second Punic War, where things got personal. This was the one with Hannibal, the Alps, and of course, those elephants. Let's clear the air. Hannibal's daring march was less about conquering Italy and more about reminding Rome that Carthage wasn't down for the count. His strategy was the ancient equivalent of a surprise audit, shaking Rome to its core. Hannibal's brilliance on the battlefield was undeniable. The Battle of Cannae in 216 BCE was a tactical masterpiece, with Hannibal's 50,000 troops enveloping and annihilating a Roman force twice its size. Yet, even with his victories, Hannibal faced challenges that no amount of battlefield genius could solve. His supply lines stretched thin, and his inability to rally enough Italian allies meant that his victories were more Pyrrhic than decisive. Meanwhile, Rome, the ever-adaptable enemy, refused to play by the rules of a fair fight. Under the leadership of Fabius Maximus, they embraced a war of attrition, avoid direct conflict, and wait for Hannibal to run out of steam. By 202 BCE, the tables had turned. Rome, having learned a trick or two from their adversary, took the fight to Carthage's doorstep. At the Battle of Zama, Scipio Africanus outmaneuvered Hannibal and sealed Carthage's fate, ending the Second Punic War. The terms were brutal. Carthage lost its overseas territories, paid a crippling indemnity, and was stripped of its navy. But Carthage, ever the comeback kid, rebuilt its economy and even paid off its war debts ahead of schedule. If resilience were a currency, Carthage was minting coins. Now, if only the story ended there. But no, history had one more act in store, the Third Punic War. By 149 BCE, Rome, perhaps suffering from a severe case of paranoia or ambition, decided that Carthage had to be erased from the map. It was a preemptive strike cloaked in the rhetoric of self-defense, and the Roman senator Cardo, the elder, famously ended every speech with Carthago delenda est. Carthage must be destroyed. Talk about a catchy slogan. The final siege of Carthage was nothing short of apocalyptic. For 3 years, the city withstood Roman assaults, its defenders displaying a blend of desperation and defiance that would make any Hollywood scriptwriter envious. But in 146 BCE, Rome finally breached Carthage's walls. The city was razed to the ground, its population sold into slavery, and its land sowed with salt. A poetic touch that, if not historically accurate, certainly encapsulates the Roman penchant for dramatic exits. So, what's the takeaway from Carthage's rise and fall? First off, never underestimate the power of adaptability. Carthage was a masterclass in reinvention, bouncing back from adversity with the tenacity of a startup that refuses to go bankrupt. Yet, even the most resilient entities can succumb to external forces beyond their control. Carthage's decline was due not just to military defeat, but to strategic missteps and the inability to fully counter Rome's relentless innovation and adaptability. Carthage also teaches us about the cyclical nature of empires. They rise, they mature, and eventually they decline, often leaving behind a legacy that's as much myth as fact. Carthage, with its legendary wealth and tragic downfall, reminds us that history, much like the Mediterranean surf, is both relentless and unpredictable. Its story is a cautionary tale of ambition and hubris, of the dangers of provoking a rival with less to lose and more to prove. As for its legacy, Carthage lives on in the echoes of history, a testament to human ingenuity and the complexities of cultural exchanges across borders. It influenced Roman culture, from religion to military tactics, and its name still carries an allure that speaks to both the romance and harsh realities of empire building. In modern culture, Carthage is a symbol of resistance and tragedy, a reminder that even the mightiest can fall, leaving us with tales that are both instructive and cautionary. In the end, as the dust settled over the ruins of Carthage, the lesson was clear. Power is fleeting, but the stories we leave behind endure. Carthage may have been destroyed, but its spirit of enterprise, resilience, and innovation lives on, a testament to the enduring power of human ambition and the enduring allure of history's grand narratives. So, as you drift off into a historical reverie, remember that Carthage's story, like all great tales, is one of both triumph and tragedy, offering lessons that resonate across the ages. In the grand tapestry of history, the ancient Celts are like that enigmatic cousin at the family reunion. Everyone's heard of them, but no one quite knows what they're up to. Let's unravel the mystery, starting with the top dogs of Celtic society, the kings and chieftains. These guys weren't just sitting on thrones made of stone, idly twirling their mustaches while the world went by. No, they were the power brokers in a world where power was as slippery as a greased pig at a fair. Now, let's talk numbers, because what's a good history lesson without some juicy stats? A typical chieftain might have commanded a retinue of about 50 to 100 warriors. Sounds like a decent-sized posse, right? But here's the kicker. These warriors weren't just muscle-bound thugs with swords. They were highly trained, fiercely loyal, and they knew how to party. Seriously, these guys would feast and fight with equal enthusiasm. And feasting wasn't just about stuffing your face with wild boar. It was a political statement. A chieftain's ability to host a grand feast was a direct reflection of his power and influence. If you couldn't keep the mead flowing, well, let's just say your days as a leader were numbered. Speaking of numbers, let's take a closer look at the king's economic toolkit. The power of a Celtic king or chieftain wasn't just measured by the size of his warband. It was also about land ownership and tribute. Land was the real currency here. It determined your wealth and status. And forget about gold coins. The Celts dealt in cattle, the four-legged currency of choice. A king with a large herd of cattle was essentially rolling in dough, even if that dough came in the form of mooing, grass-munching livestock. Now, if you're imagining these kings as majestic figures draped in golden torques, you're only half right. Sure, they wore them. Torques were the ancient Celtic bling, after all. But being a king wasn't all about the glam. It involved a lot of grunt work. A leader had to be a skilled diplomat, a shrewd economist, and a competent military strategist. And let's not forget the Druidic advisors whispering in their ears. These wise men, with their mystical aura and encyclopedic knowledge, were the ancient equivalent of a think tank, guiding their leaders through the murky waters of politics and war. But let's not get too romantic about it. The life of a Celtic king was precarious, to say the least. You might be the toast of the tribe today, but tomorrow, well, if you slipped up, you might find yourself deposed or worse. It was a high-stakes game, where the only thing more dangerous than an enemy's sword was the ambition of someone within your own ranks. And while we're at it, let's bust a few myths. The Celts weren't a monolithic group roaming the countryside in tartan kilts. They were a diverse collection of tribes, each with its own customs and leadership structures. Sure, they shared a common cultural heritage, but politics, that was as messy and varied as you can imagine. And the idea of the noble savage living in harmony with nature, well, that's a romantic notion cooked up by later centuries. The Celts were as complex and contradictory as any other society, capable of great art and brutal warfare in equal measure. In sum, the kings and chieftains of the Celts were more than just figureheads. They were the linchpins of their societies, balancing the demands of leadership with the ever-present threat of power struggles. They lived in a world where alliances could shift with the wind, and the line between friend and foe was razor-thin. So, next time you hear about a Celtic king, remember, behind every grand feast and glittering talk, there was a leader playing a high-stakes game of survival. Now that we've hung out with the Celtic kings, let's shift our gaze to the warriors, the real action heroes of this ancient narrative. If the kings were the brains of Celtic society, these warriors were definitely the brawn. But don't let that fool you into thinking they were just a bunch of muscle-bound meatheads swinging swords aimlessly. Oh no, these guys were more like the Navy SEAL of their day. They trained rigorously, fought fiercely, and had a flair for the dramatic that would make any action movie star blush. First off, forget the idea that these warriors were just men running wild and free on the battlefield without a clue. Archaeological evidence and historical accounts suggest that there was method in their madness. They were trained from a young age, mastering the art of combat as if it were a mandatory school subject. Their weapon of choice, the long sword, roughly 30 inches of cold, hard iron that could wreak havoc in the right hands, and these guys knew how to wield it like an extension of their own limbs. Talk about commitment to the craft. And let's not overlook their infamous penchant for collecting heads. Yep, you heard that right. The Celts were avid headhunters, but not in a creepy horror movie kind of way. In Celtic culture, taking an enemy's head was the ultimate sign of victory and bravery. It was basically the ancient equivalent of a trophy room. The Greek historian Diodorus Siculus even claimed that Celtic warriors would embalm the heads of their most esteemed enemies in cedar oil, proudly displaying them as proof of their prowess. Not exactly the kind of keepsake you'd find in your grandma's china cabinet, but hey, to each their own. Now, let's address the Hollywood stereotype that's been painted over the years. You know, the one with blue-painted warriors running through the misty hills like extras in a fantasy film. The truth is, the Celts did sometimes paint themselves with woad, a blue dye, but it was more about ritual than fashion. It wasn't an everyday look, more like special occasion face paint. Think of it as the ancient version of putting on your Sunday best, except with more war cries and less brunch. Speaking of myths, let's dive into the infamous Gallic Wars. Led by none other than Julius Caesar in the 1st century BC, these battles were a series of military campaigns waged by the Romans against several Gallic tribes. It was a brutal affair, with Caesar's forces numbering around 50,000 troops at their height. Despite their fierce reputation, the Celtic warriors were up against a well-oiled Roman machine. The Gallic Wars weren't just a clash of swords and shields. They were a collision of cultures, tactics, and technologies. And while the Celts were ultimately defeated, their resistance was nothing short of legendary. Archaeological digs have unearthed fascinating insights into the day-to-day lives of these warriors. For instance, the site of Latine in Switzerland has revealed a treasure trove of weapons, armor, and even chariots. Yes, chariots. The Celts were among the few European cultures to employ them in battle, and they did so with style. These two-wheeled war machines were usually manned by a driver and a warrior, creating a deadly duo that could outmaneuver foot soldiers with ease. It was like the ancient world's version of a tactical strike force. Now, let's talk about their armor, or in some cases, the lack thereof. Contrary to popular belief, not all Celtic warriors wore heavy armor. Many favored mobility over protection, darning leather or chainmail for flexibility. And helmets, they were often elaborately decorated, sometimes with animal motifs or horns. But don't get too carried away with the horned helmet image. That's more Viking lore than Celtic reality. Economically speaking, being a warrior was a pretty good gig if you survived long enough. Successful warriors could gain land, livestock, and even political power. This wasn't just a career. It was a potential ticket to upward mobility. It also explains why so many young men were willing to risk life and limb in battle. The rewards, if you lived to collect them, were substantial. So there you have it, the Celtic warriors in all their glory and grit. They weren't just mindless fighters. They were skilled, strategic, and undeniably charismatic. They lived in a society where martial prowess was the currency of respect, and they cashed in with gusto. As we dig deeper into the Celtic world, remember, these warriors were more than just the muscle of their society. They were the heartbeat of a culture that valued strength, honor, and yes, a good headhunt. But don't worry, there's still plenty more to uncover about these fascinating folks. Stay tuned for more tales from the Celtic front. While our Celtic warriors were out there collecting heads and making history, their more cerebral counterparts, the Druids, were busy weaving the intricate web of Celtic society. Picture the Druids as the ultimate multitaskers, priests, judges, scientists, and political whisperers all rolled into one. They were the brainy backbone of the Celtic world, wielding influence through wisdom rather than warfare. These enigmatic figures were so integral to Celtic life that even Julius Caesar, not exactly a Druid fanboy, acknowledged their sway. He described them as concerned with divine worship, the due performance of sacrifices, public and private, and the interpretation of ritual questions. Sounds like a full-time gig, doesn't it? But let's not get too misty-eyed just yet. The Druids are often wrapped in a shroud of romanticized mystery. Think Gandalf, but with more mistletoe. The truth is, they were a complex mix of philosophers and natural scientists, with a penchant for the esoteric. Their education was no walk in the park either. A budding Druid might undergo up to 20 years of training, memorizing poetry, law, and lore. Imagine cramming for 2 decades without even a single flashcard or a late-night coffee run. In the courtroom of Celtic society, Druids served as unbiased judges. Their rulings carried weight, settling disputes and ensuring justice in a world where grudges could easily lead to blood feuds. And their judgments weren't just scribbled down on a scroll and forgotten. Oh no, if you ignored a Druid's decision, you risked a fate worse than a social media cancellation, being excommunicated from society. In Druidic terms, that meant being cut off from religious rites and community life. Basically, the ancient equivalent of being ghosted by everyone you know. However, it's not all incense and enlightenment. Let's address the elephant, or rather, the sacrificial bull, in the room, human sacrifices. Roman writers like Tacitus and Pliny the Elder painted the Druids as bloodthirsty mystics, eager to appease their gods with human offerings. Sure, there's some archaeological evidence suggesting ritual killings, but let's apply a sprinkle of skepticism here. The Romans weren't exactly unbiased reporters. They had an empire to justify, after all. Demonizing the Druids as savage pagans was a convenient narrative to push when you're trying to conquer and civilize. The Druids also had a firm grip on the calendar, literally. They devised a complex system of timekeeping, aligning their festivals with lunar and solar cycles. The most famous of these, of course, is Samhain, the precursor to modern Halloween. It was a time when the veil between the worlds was thinnest, and spirits roamed freely. Forget pumpkin spice lattes. This was a time for bonfires and masquerades, with Druids playing a central role in the ceremonies. They were the original event planners, orchestrating communal gatherings that reinforced social bonds and cultural identity. Economically speaking, the Druids were no slouches either. They understood the value of resources and land, often advising chieftains on matters of agriculture and trade. In a society where the natural world was both revered and feared, having a Druid in your corner was like having an ancient ecological consultant. They knew their stuff, from the medicinal properties of herbs to the cyclical patterns of weather. It wasn't just about casting spells. It was about understanding the environment and making it work for you. Now, let's pivot to the Romans' less-than-glowing Yelp reviews of the Druids. The Romans, being the pragmatic road builders they were, found the Druids' influence over the Celts a bit unnerving. Caesar's campaigns against the Gauls weren't just military conquests, they were cultural clashes. The Druids represented a resistance to Romanization, a stubborn adherence to Celtic traditions that refused to be paved over by Roman roads. As a result, Druids were often targets in Roman narratives, depicted as obstacles to progress rather than keepers of knowledge. But before we judge the Druids by Roman accounts alone, let's remember the allure of their mystique. They were seen as wise and enigmatic, possessing knowledge that could heal or harm. This duality made them both revered and feared, a testament to their complex role in society. They were the keepers of secrets, the guardians of tradition, and their legacy is as enduring as it is enigmatic. As we continue to unravel the mysteries of the Celts, the Druids stand out as a testament to the power of knowledge over brute force. They remind us that in the grand chess game of history, sometimes the most influential pieces are the ones that move quietly, behind the scenes, yet always in control. We'll keep exploring this fascinating world, but for now, let's appreciate the Druids for what they were, a blend of intellect, mystery, and a touch of magic, without which the story of the Celts would be far less colorful. While the Druids were busy weaving spells and societal norms, let's take a moment to appreciate the unsung heroes of Celtic culture, the farmers and artisans. These folks were the backbone of Celtic society, the ones who kept everything ticking while warriors and Druids hogged the limelight. They weren't just playing sidekick in this historical drama. They were the sturdy foundation upon which the Celtic world stood. Let's start with the farmers, who weren't just plowing fields and herding cattle for kicks. They were the lifeblood of the economy. In a time when your wealth was measured in livestock, farmers were essentially the Celtic equivalent of Wall Street brokers. Land was king, and cattle were the currency jingling in their pockets, or rather, mooing in their fields. A typical Celtic farm was a bustling hub of activity, with fields of barley and wheat stretching across the landscape. These grains weren't just for bread. They were the raw materials for that all-important social lubricant, beer. Yep, the Celts had quite the penchant for brewing, and their beer was a staple at those legendary feasts. So, next time you're sipping a cold one, raise a glass to the ancient farmers who laid the groundwork for your brew. Now, if you're picturing these farmers as solitary figures toiling away in isolation, think again. The Celtic community was deeply interconnected, with families and neighbors working together to bring in the harvest. It was a communal effort, a reminder that even in the ancient world, teamwork made the dream work. And speaking of dreams, let's debunk the myth that Celtic life was all about lounging in lush green fields, carefree and unburdened. The reality, farming was a tough gig, subject to the whims of weather and the threat of raids. A bad harvest could spell disaster, and with it, the threat of famine looming large. Economically, running a Celtic household was no small feat. The head of a household had to be a master of resource management, juggling food production with the demands of livestock care. A typical family farm might have a few acres of land and a small herd of cattle or sheep. But here's the kicker. The Celts weren't just savvy farmers. They were also shrewd traders. Barter was the name of the game, with goods and services exchanged in a web of economic relationships. It wasn't just about survival. It was about thriving, even in the face of adversity. Now, let's pivot to the artisans, the creative geniuses behind those intricate designs we all know and love. Celtic art was an explosion of color and creativity, a vivid reflection of a rich cultural tapestry. These artisans were masters of their craft, creating everything from elaborate jewelry to finely wrought weapons. And let's not forget the iconic Celtic knots, those mesmerizing patterns that seemed to twist and turn without end. These weren't just pretty designs. They were infused with symbolism and meaning, a testament to the Celts' deep appreciation for art and aesthetics. The life of an artisan, much like that of a farmer, was a blend of creativity and commerce. These craftsmen and women were integral to the fabric of Celtic society, their work in demand across tribes and regions. A skilled artisan could command respect and even influence, their creations a tangible symbol of wealth and status. And here's a fun fact. Celtic artisans were known for their metalwork, particularly their skill with iron and bronze. This wasn't just about making pretty things. It was about creating tools and weapons that could make or break a warrior on the battlefield. But let's not romanticize it too much. Being an artisan was hard work, requiring a keen eye for detail and a steady hand. Mistakes could be costly, both in terms of materials and reputation. Yet despite the challenges, these artisans thrived, their work a vibrant testament to the ingenuity and creativity of the Celtic people. Commerce in the Celtic world was an intricate dance, a blend of barter and trade that connected distant tribes and regions. Cattle might have been the primary currency, but other goods, like salt, textiles, and metalwork, also played a crucial role in the economy. Trade routes crisscrossed the Celtic lands, facilitating the exchange of goods and ideas. It was a dynamic system, adaptable and resilient, a testament to the Celts' ability to thrive in a world where the only constant was change. So, was life in the Celtic world really just a series of feasts and battles? The reality was far more nuanced. While the warriors might have been the rock stars of their day, it was the farmers and artisans who kept the show on the road. They were the unsung heroes, the ones who ensured that there was food on the table and art to admire. Their stories are a reminder that history isn't just about the big names and grand events. It's about the everyday people who made it all possible, the ones who toiled in the fields and crafted beauty from raw materials. As we continue to explore the rich tapestry of Celtic life, let's not forget these foundational figures. They remind us that history is a patchwork of stories, each thread contributing to the larger narrative. And while the warriors and druids might have been the headliners, it's the farmers and artisans who were the heart and soul of the Celtic world. Stay tuned, because this journey is far from over. We've still got plenty of ground to cover and stories to uncover in the fascinating world of the Celts. And so we find ourselves at the end of our Celtic journey, a tapestry woven with the lives of warriors, druids, farmers, and artisans. It's a story as vibrant as a Celtic knot, but now we need to tug on those threads and see how they unravel in the face of Roman expansion. Spoiler alert, it's a tale filled with as much grit as glamour. First things first, let's tackle the warrior ethos that was as much a part of Celtic life as their legendary feasts. This was a society that revered strength and bravery above all else. It's easy to see why. In a world where your neighbor might decide your cattle looked too tempting to pass up, being able to defend your turf was a must. But here's where it gets tricky. While the Celts were all about personal valor and one-on-one combat, the Romans were playing an entirely different game. Picture a well-oiled military machine, all gears and precision, versus a bunch of passionate soloists. The Celts might have brought flair and ferocity, but the Romans brought organization. And well, there's a reason the tortoise beat the hare. When Caesar rolled into Gaul in 58 BC, he wasn't there for the wine and cheese. He had around 50,000 disciplined soldiers, whereas the Celtic tribes were often fragmented, each warrior more loyal to their chieftain than any grand coalition. The Celts' inability to unify under a single banner was their Achilles' heel. It's like trying to win a tug-of-war contest with everyone pulling in different directions. The Romans exploited this division with the finesse of a maestro conducting a symphony of conquest. Economically, the Romans also had the upper hand. Their society was rooted in a complex system of trade and taxation, bolstered by a currency that didn't move. The Celtic economy, meanwhile, was as pastoral as their landscape, with cattle as the main currency and barter as the primary method of transaction. But you can't exactly pay taxes in cows without running into some logistical nightmares. So, when the Romans came knocking with their promises of infrastructure and coins, many Celts found themselves at a crossroads. Stick with tradition or embrace the new order. It was a classic case of adapt or perish. In the grand scheme of things, the Celts' social structure, with its fierce warriors and mystical druids, was both their strength and their downfall. While their warrior ethos instilled a sense of fierce independence, it also fostered division. The Druids, with their deep roots in Celtic tradition, were bastions of resistance, often rallying tribes against Roman encroachment. But when the Romans targeted these intellectual elite, the Celts lost not just spiritual leaders, but also key societal glue. It was like removing the spine from a body. You might still have the limbs, but good luck getting them to work together. However, let's not rush to write off the Celts as merely victims of Roman might. Their resistance was legendary, and their cultural legacy is nothing short of enduring. Despite the Roman steamroller, Celtic art, language, and traditions left an indelible mark on history. The Celts might have lost the military battle, but culturally, they were the phoenix rising from the ashes of conquest. Their artistic motifs, from swirling patterns to intricate metalwork, continue to captivate, while their myths and legends have passed into the annals of folklore. And here's the kicker. The romance of the Celts lies in their complexity. They were warriors and poets, farmers and philosophers, dreamers and realists. The Romans might have conquered their lands, but they couldn't eclipse the Celtic spirit. The myths that surround them, of fierce warriors with blue-painted faces, of Druids whispering ancient secrets, still hold a certain allure. But beneath the romantic veneer lies a society that was as much about survival as it was about celebration. In the end, the story of the Celts is a reminder of the resilience of culture in the face of overwhelming odds. They were outmatched and outgunned, but they left a legacy that still resonates. So next time you find yourself drawn to a Celtic knot or intrigued by tales of ancient Druids, remember, history is as much about the stories we tell as it is about the facts we uncover. The Celts may have been conquered, but their spirit, that's a flame that continues to burn bright, a testament to the enduring power of human creativity and resilience. And there you have it, the Celts, in all their glory and grit, their legends and their reality. It's a tale that's as much about what was lost as it is about what endures, a story that reminds us that history is never just about the victors. It's about everyone who had a part to play, whether in battle or at the forge, whether in rituals beneath the moon or in the fields beneath the sun. So as we close this chapter, let's raise a glass to the Celts, to their legacy, and to the stories that keep their spirit alive. Pontiac didn't just stroll onto the historical stage. He stormed in like a thunderous Michigan storm, complete with lightning bolts and a soundtrack of war cries. It was the mid-1700s, and pre-revolutionary America was a jigsaw puzzle of colonial ambitions and tribal tenacity, each trying to outshine or outmaneuver the other. Born around 1720, Pontiac was an Ottawa chief who had a knack for turning the cacophony of tribal voices into a powerful chorus against the colonial powers playing chess with their lands. He was the kind of leader who didn't just unite tribes. He made them believe they could kick the empire's powdered wigs into the Great Lakes. Pontiac's early years were spent in a landscape dominated by the French and British, who were busy bickering over North America like two kids fighting over the last piece of cake. The French had the upper hand in the region now known as Michigan, thanks to their fur trading expertise and a certain je ne sais quoi that came with dealing in beaver pelts. The British, on the other hand, were chomping at the bit, eager to expand their influence and stuff their pockets with colonial riches. For native tribes like the Ottawa, this was less of an opportunity and more of a never-ending headache. Growing up in such tumultuous times, Pontiac learned quickly that survival depended on both strength and cunning. By the 1750s, Pontiac had made a name for himself as a formidable leader, respected not just by his own tribe, but by neighboring ones too. His ability to negotiate and his sheer audacity earned him the kind of reputation that could make even the most hardened British officer sweat in his red coat. But Pontiac wasn't just about flexing muscle. He was about building alliances, a skill he would wield like a tomahawk in the years to come. The French and Indian War was the geopolitical circus of the day, with France and Britain battling for supremacy while native tribes watched from the bleachers, often dragged into the fray. Pontiac, though, was not one to simply watch. By aligning with the French, he positioned himself as a key player, though it was the beginning of a risky game. When the British emerged victorious in 1763, they decided to consolidate their power by imposing strict regulations on the Western territories. Enter the Proclamation of 1763, a royal decree that declared all lands west of the Appalachian Mountains off-limits to settlers. It was meant to pacify the native tribes, but like most imperial niceties, it was about as effective as a rain dance in a drought. For the native tribes, this proclamation was a hollow promise, as settlers and traders continued to encroach on their lands with all the subtlety of a bull in a china shop. Pontiac, ever the opportunist and visionary, saw an opening. He believed that the only way to protect their lands and way of life was to unite the tribes against the British. This wasn't just a simple case of us versus them. It was a complex dance of diplomacy, warfare, and survival. Pontiac's ability to unite disparate tribes was nothing short of miraculous. Think of it as herding cats, if the cats were actually fiercely independent warriors with their own agendas. He called upon the Ottawa, Ojibwa, Potawatomi, and even the Seneca, convincing them that a united front was their best shot at preserving their autonomy. It was a plan that required not just persuasion but a shared vision, and Pontiac had both in spades. In the spring of 1763, Pontiac's War, as it would come to be known, kicked off with a bang, or rather, several bangs, as he launched a coordinated attack on Fort Detroit. This was no small feat. Fort Detroit was a significant stronghold. Pontiac's siege was an audacious move designed to send a message. The attack, while not immediately successful, set the stage for the conflict that would spread across the Great Lakes region. Pontiac's charisma and strategic mind turned what could have been a fleeting rebellion into a broader movement, rallying more tribes to the cause. But let's not romanticize the whole affair. This was a brutal and bloody conflict, marked by skirmishes, betrayals, and the harsh realities of war. Pontiac's forces managed to capture several British forts, but the British retaliated with ruthless efficiency. It was a game of chess where each move was a matter of life and death, and the stakes were nothing less than the future of entire nations. Despite the odds, Pontiac's campaign was a testament to the power of unity and the relentless fight for sovereignty. It was about more than just land. It was about identity, culture, and survival. Pontiac's leadership was a beacon of hope in a time of uncertainty, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, courage and cunning could tip the scales. As the conflict dragged on, it became clear that this was not just a war of weapons, but a battle of wills. Pontiac's ability to inspire and lead was unmatched, but the reality of fighting an empire was harsh. Supplies were scarce, and the British were relentless in their pursuit of control. In the end, the rebellion was quelled, but not without leaving a lasting impact on the colonial landscape and the native tribes involved. Pontiac's legacy is one of resilience and resistance, a story that serves as both a cautionary tale and a source of inspiration. His leadership in the face of colonial might is a reminder that history is never a straightforward narrative, but a complex tapestry woven from the threads of countless lives and countless struggles. And while Pontiac's war may not have achieved its ultimate goals, it set the stage for future resistance and highlighted the enduring spirit of the native peoples in the face of adversity. So, there you have it, the beginning of Pontiac's rise, set against the backdrop of colonial ambition and tribal resilience. A tale of a leader who dared to dream big and fight even bigger, leaving a legacy that echoes through the corridors of history. As Pontiac's tale continues, we're diving into the gritty details of Pontiac's War, or the Pontiac Rebellion, which honestly sounds like a garage band that never quite made it past playing local gigs. But unlike a forgotten rock group, this uprising was anything but minor. It was a cacophony of battle cries, strategic maneuvers, and a daring siege that would make any military strategist sit up and take notes. So picture this: Fort Detroit, 1763, a key player in Pontiac's game of chess against the British, and a fortress that stuck out like a sore thumb in the Great Lakes region. The British, fresh off their victory against the French, thought they had it all figured out, but they hadn't counted on Pontiac's audacity or the tribe's resolve. The siege of Detroit was Pontiac's way of saying, "You might have won the last battle, but the war isn't over." The attack was a masterclass in guerrilla warfare. Pontiac, ever the cunning strategist, knew that a full frontal assault was about as wise as poking a bear with a stick. Instead, he opted for subterfuge, surrounding the fort and cutting off supplies. The siege dragged on for months, with Pontiac's forces employing every trick in the book, from feigned retreats to surprise attacks. It was warfare with a dash of theater, and Pontiac was the director. But let's debunk a myth right off the bat. The Siege of Detroit wasn't a Hollywood blockbuster with heroic charges and triumphant victories. It was a gritty, grinding affair, marked by attrition and desperation. Pontiac's forces, numbering around 900 warriors, faced a well-fortified British garrison of about 120 soldiers and 40 civilians. The odds were long, but Pontiac played the long game, hoping to starve the fort into submission. And here's a twist worthy of any good story. Pontiac wasn't just dealing with external enemies. Within the ranks of the tribes, not everyone was on board with a prolonged siege. Some tribes wavered, questioning the wisdom of taking on an empire with seemingly infinite resources. This internal dissent was a reminder that unity in resistance was as fragile as a peace treaty written on paper in the rain. Despite these challenges, the siege of Detroit was a statement, a bold declaration that the native tribes weren't just pawns in the imperial game. They were players with their own stakes, refusing to be shuffled aside like cards in a rigged deck. Pontiac's tactics might have been unorthodox, but they were effective, underscoring the point that sometimes the best offense is a good defense, or in this case, a strategic encirclement. However, the siege wasn't without its costs. Supplies for the besieging forces were stretched thin, and the British, no slouches themselves, managed to sneak reinforcements into the fort. In the end, Pontiac's forces couldn't capture Detroit, but the siege achieved something more significant. It set the stage for a broader uprising across the region. The Pontiac rebellion spread like wildfire, with forts from Pennsylvania to the Mississippi River feeling the heat. The rebellion wasn't just a tale of military might. It was a complex web of economic and political factors. The British, in their quest for control, had imposed policies that rubbed salt in the wounds of the native tribes. The fur trade, once a lucrative business for the tribes, was now tightly controlled by the British, who dictated prices and terms with all the grace of a bull in a china shop. This economic squeeze was the final straw for many tribes, fueling their support for Pontiac's cause. And let's not forget the human element. Pontiac wasn't a one-man show. He was the figurehead of a movement that included countless warriors, each with their own motivations. For some, it was about defending their lands and way of life. For others, it was about striking back against years of encroachment and broken promises. The rebellion was a tapestry of personal and collective grievances, woven together by a shared desire for autonomy. Now, let's talk tactics, because Pontiac's war wasn't just fought with bows and arrows. In a move that would make any modern tactician proud, Pontiac's forces employed psychological warfare, spreading rumors and misinformation to sow confusion among the British. They used the terrain to their advantage, launching hit-and-run attacks that left the British reeling. It was a masterclass in asymmetrical warfare, centuries before it became a buzzword in military circles. But here's the kicker. While Pontiac's tactics were ahead of their time, they couldn't overcome the harsh realities of logistics and manpower. The British, with their deep pockets and global reach, could afford to play the long game. They gradually regained control, employing a combination of military force and diplomacy to quell the rebellion. By 1765, Pontiac's war was winding down, leaving a trail of destruction and unresolved tensions in its wake. Yet, the impact of Pontiac's rebellion was far-reaching. It exposed the vulnerabilities of the British Empire and highlighted the enduring spirit of the native tribes. It also forced the British to rethink their policies, leading to a more conciliatory approach in the years that followed. The rebellion might not have achieved its immediate objectives, but it left a lasting legacy, shaping the course of native and colonial relations for years to come. So there you have it, a deep dive into the rebellion that dared to challenge an empire. Pontiac's war was a testament to the power of resistance and the complexities of colonial entanglements. It was a saga of courage and cunning, a reminder that history is defined as much by those who fight against the tide as by those who ride its waves. And while Pontiac's war may have ended, the story of native resistance was far from over. Stay tuned, because this historical roller coaster has plenty of twists and turns left to explore. As Pontiac's story rumbles on like a historical freight train, one can't help but marvel at how he turned the art of war into a mind game. Let's just say, if the battlefield was a chessboard, Pontiac wasn't the type to waste moves. Instead, he engaged in psychological warfare that had the British scrambling like they were trying to solve a Rubik's Cube blindfolded. Now, let's set the stage. It's 1763, and the British are fresh off their victory in the French and Indian War, strutting around with all the swagger of a peacock in a petting zoo. The Treaty of Paris had just been signed, marking the end of France's colonial ambitions in North America. But this treaty, rather than being a neat little bow to tie up the war, was more like a Pandora's box of problems. France ceded its lands east of the Mississippi River to Britain, but didn't bother to ask, "Hey, native tribes, how do you feel about this?" Classic case of colonial powers treating land like monopoly properties. For Pontiac and the native tribes, this was a rude awakening. The British, Now the new landlords decided they were going to run things their way, which meant tightening control over trade and land. They had all the finesse of a bull in a china shop, enforcing policies that turned the fur trade into their personal piggy bank. This wasn't just economic meddling. It was a direct hit to the livelihood of tribes who'd been trading furs long before Europeans knew what a beaver even looked like. Pontiac, ever the strategist, saw an opportunity in the chaos. He knew that open warfare wasn't the only path to victory. Instead, he played the long game, employing a mix of diplomacy and psychological tactics to undermine the British. He wasn't content to just fight with bows and arrows. He fought with words, alliances, and the power of perception. One of Pontiac's shrewdest moves was spreading rumors among the British. He capitalized on their paranoia, making them believe that the entire frontier was on the brink of explosion. Imagine it, British officers pacing their garrisons, clutching their maps like they were ancient prophecies, trying to figure out where the next attack would come from. Pontiac's psychological warfare was all about keeping the enemy on edge, making them question every shadow and sound. But Pontiac's real masterstroke was his diplomatic maneuvers. He wasn't just a war chief. He was a statesman, pulling together tribes like a maestro crafting a symphony. His ability to unite the Arawa, Ojibwa, Potawatomi, and others was akin to herding cats, if the cats were armed and had centuries of grudges. Yet Pontiac persevered, understanding that strength lay in numbers, and that a united front could present a formidable challenge to British ambitions. The British, meanwhile, were fumbling around the continent like tourists with a bad map. They underestimated the complexity of native politics, viewing the tribes as a monolithic block rather than a tapestry of diverse cultures and interests. This miscalculation was their Achilles heel, and Pontiac exploited it like a seasoned poker player bluffing with a pair of twos. Yet, for all his cunning, Pontiac was also navigating a minefield of internal politics. Not every tribe was on board with his grand vision. Some were wary of antagonizing the British, fearing retribution, or simply doubting the feasibility of taking on an empire. This internal dissent was a reminder that even the most charismatic leaders must contend with the complex realities of coalition building, where unity is as fragile as porcelain. Amidst this backdrop of intrigue and maneuvering, the Treaty of Paris was supposed to be a beacon of peace. Instead, it was a catalyst for conflict, as the British clumsily tried to impose their will on a frontier that had its own rules. The proclamation of 1763, which was meant to pacify native tribes by halting settler expansion west of the Appalachians, was about as effective as putting a band-aid on a bullet wound. Settlers ignored it with the kind of determination usually reserved for New Year's resolutions, encroaching on native lands with abandon. Pontiac understood that diplomacy was a double-edged sword. While alliances were crucial, they were also tenuous, dependent on the shifting sands of loyalty and interest. His ability to navigate these waters was nothing short of remarkable, but even he couldn't control every variable. The British, determined to secure their new territories, employed a blend of military might and diplomatic overtures to undermine Pontiac's coalition. They offered promises, some genuine, others hollow, reminding us that politics is often a game of smoke and mirrors. Yet Pontiac's legacy wasn't just one of resistance. It was a testament to the power of adaptation. In a world where change was the only constant, he adapted, using every tool at his disposal to fight for his people's future. His psychological and diplomatic tactics were precursors to modern strategies, underscoring the age-old truth. In war and politics, the mind is often the most potent weapon. As we delve further into Pontiac's saga, it's clear that his battle was as much about identity as it was about territory. He wasn't just fighting for land. He was fighting to preserve a way of life, a culture that had thrived long before European ships sailed onto the horizon. The struggle for sovereignty was a reminder that history isn't just a series of events, but a complex tapestry woven from the hopes, dreams, and struggles of countless individuals. Pontiac's war may have wound down, but the reverberations of his actions echoed through the corridors of history. His story is a testament to the enduring spirit of resistance and the complexities of colonial entanglements. Stay with us as we continue to unravel this tale, exploring the twists and turns of a leader who dared to challenge an empire and left an indelible mark on the course of history. As the dust settled on Pontiac's War, the landscape of North America was a tangled mess of dashed hopes and simmering tensions. The British, having emerged with their grip on power intact, now faced the thorny business of cleaning up the geopolitical mess left in the rebellion's wake. Picture a game of Jenga after a particularly disastrous turn, pieces scattered everywhere, and everyone wondering how to rebuild without toppling everything again. But let's talk about the unsung ripple effects of this conflict, the economic aftershocks. Pontiac's War was not just a military quagmire. It was an economic sinkhole that sucked resources faster than a leaky bucket. The British had to shell out a small fortune to maintain their forts and pay their troops. And let's not forget the cost of repairing the damage across the frontier. We're talking about thousands of pounds sterling, serious money that made even the stingiest British Treasury clerk wince. For the native tribes, the economic impact was equally profound. The war had disrupted trade routes that had been in place for generations. The fur trade, once a thriving business that provided not just goods but also a form of currency, was thrown into chaos. Beavers, it turns out, didn't really care about political upheaval, but the traders sure did. The British, keen to reassert control, imposed new trade regulations that were about as subtle as a sledgehammer, further squeezing the tribes economically. And while we're busting myths, let's address the romantic notion that Pontiac's War was purely about noble resistance. Sure, it was about fighting for land and identity, but economics were the fuel that kept the fire burning. For many tribes, aligning with Pontiac wasn't just a political statement, it was a financial necessity. The British stranglehold on trade had real-world consequences, affecting food supplies, tools, and the day-to-day survival of entire communities. In the aftermath, alliances that had seemed rock-solid during the war began to show cracks. The unity Pontiac had forged was a temporary coalition. Think of it more as a business merger than a marriage. Once the immediate threat receded, old rivalries and disputes over hunting grounds and trade routes re-emerged. The Ottawa, Ojibwa, Potawatomi, and others who had banded together found themselves navigating a precarious balance between cooperation and competition. On the British side, the war's end didn't translate into a peaceful status quo. The proclamation of 1763, intended to be a peacemaking gesture, was ignored with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for tax audits. Settlers continued to push into native lands, and the British were left playing whack-a-mole with frontier conflicts. It was a classic case of the more things change, the more they stay the same. Politically, the British had to tread carefully. They couldn't afford another costly rebellion, so they leaned into diplomacy, albeit clumsily. They negotiated treaties with various tribes, trying to put a lid on the boiling pot of discontent. These treaties were often lopsided, with the British offering paltry concessions in exchange for vast tracts of land. It was a bit like trading magic beans for a cow, except there was no fairy tale ending. Yet amidst this political maneuvering, the British learned a valuable lesson. Underestimating native tribes was a mistake they couldn't afford to make again. Pontiac's War had exposed the vulnerabilities of their colonial strategy, forcing them to rethink their approach. They couldn't just impose their will with brute force. They needed to understand the intricate web of tribal politics and economics. For Pontiac, the aftermath was bittersweet. He had become a symbol of resistance, but his coalition was fracturing, and his influence was waning. He traveled to Fort Ontario in 1766 to negotiate peace with the British, a move that underscored both his pragmatism and the harsh reality of the situation. His vision of a united native front had faltered, but his impact on the British psyche was undeniable. Yet, let's not romanticize Pontiac as a tragic hero. He was a complex figure, a blend of ambition and pragmatism, navigating a world where the rules changed faster than a card shark's deck. His legacy was one of resilience and adaptation, a reminder that leadership isn't about winning every battle, but about forging a path forward even when the odds are stacked against you. So, as the smoke cleared and the dust settled, what was left? A landscape forever altered by conflict, patchwork of shifting alliances and economic realities that would shape the future of native and colonial relations. Pontiac's War may have ended, but the story it started was far from over. Stay tuned, because the threads of this historical tapestry are still weaving new patterns, and there's plenty more to unravel in the saga of North America's tumultuous past. As the echoes of Pontiac's war faded, the stage was set for the final act of his tumultuous saga. Pontiac, once the charismatic conductor of a rebellious symphony, now found himself navigating a landscape as unpredictable as a river in flood. The man who had dared to challenge an empire was about to become a cautionary tale, his legacy a tangled web of myth and reality. First, let's tackle the myths head-on. Pontiac is often painted as a larger-than-life figure, a native Robin Hood fighting against the colonial machine. But reality, as it often does, paints a more complex picture. Pontiac wasn't just a romantic hero. He was a savvy political operator who knew how to play the game. He understood that power wasn't about brute strength alone. It was about alliances, negotiation, and knowing when to hold them and when to fold them. By the late 1760, Pontiac's influence was waning, his coalition unraveling faster than a sweater caught on a nail. The British, having learned a thing or two from the rebellion, were busy tightening their grip with a mix of diplomacy and military presence. For Pontiac, it was a game of diminishing returns. His dreams of a united native front were slipping through his fingers like sand. In 1769, Pontiac's story took a dark turn. While visiting Cahokia, a small village near present-day St. Louis, he was assassinated by a Peoria warrior. The reasons for his murder are murky, wrapped in layers of intrigue and speculation. Some say it was a personal vendetta, others argue it was a political move to curry favor with the British. What we do know is that Pontiac's death sent shockwaves through the native communities, a stark reminder that leadership in turbulent times was a perilous endeavor. Now, let's talk about the irony of Pontiac's fate. The man who had fought tooth and nail against colonial encroachment was ultimately undone not by British soldiers, but by intertribal politics. It's a bitter twist that underscores the complexities of native resistance. Unity was both a strength and a vulnerability, dependent on fragile alliances that could shatter with a single act of violence. In the end, Pontiac's assassination was a brutal reminder that the battlefield wasn't always a place. It was often a matter of hearts and minds. Pontiac's legacy, like most historical legacies, is a mixed bag. On one hand, he remains a symbol of native resistance, a leader who dared to defy the status quo and rally his people against overwhelming odds. On the other hand, his story is a cautionary tale about the limits of power and the precarious nature of alliances. His war may not have achieved its ultimate goals, but it did force the British to reconsider their approach, leading to changes in colonial policy that acknowledged the need for better relations with native tribes. The broader implications of Pontiac's legacy extend beyond his immediate impact. His rebellion set the stage for future resistance movements, a precursor to the struggles that would continue to shape North America. It highlighted the enduring spirit of native peoples, who, despite the odds, continued to fight for their land, their culture, and their autonomy. In this light, Pontiac's story isn't just a chapter in history, it's a testament to the resilience of those who refuse to be erased. Moreover, Pontiac's tale serves as a stark reminder of the human cost of colonial expansion. The struggle for land and resources didn't just play out on maps and treaties. It was a deeply personal battle, fought in the hearts and minds of those who lived it. For the native tribes, it was a fight for survival, a desperate attempt to hold onto a way of life that was under threat from forces beyond their control. As we wrap up this journey into Pontiac's world, it's important to remember that history is rarely black and white. It's a complex tapestry, woven from the threads of countless lives and countless stories. Pontiac was a leader, a visionary, a strategist, and a man caught in the crosshairs of history. His legacy is a powerful reminder that the past is never just the past. It's a living, breathing part of who we are today. In the end, Pontiac's story is both a warning and an inspiration. It's a tale of ambition, of resilience, and of the enduring human spirit. As we turn the page on this chapter, let's carry forward the lessons it offers. That unity is a powerful force, but a fragile one. That leadership demands both vision and pragmatism, and that the fight for justice and autonomy is a battle worth fighting, no matter the odds. So there you have it, Pontiac, the man, the myth, the legacy. A story of defiance, of dreams, and of a leader who dared to challenge the tide. His impact may have been blunted by time, but his spirit lives on, a testament to the power of resistance and the enduring quest for justice. As the echoes of his war fade, let's not forget the lessons of history, for they continue to shape the world we live in today. In the frenetic whirlwind of 15th-century Spain, where throne-grabbing was the national pastime and family feuds were as common as tapas, a girl named Isabella was born. Her life was like an episode of a medieval soap opera, except it was all too real, and the stakes were a kingdom, not a rose. Born on April 22, 1451, to John Roman II of Castile and his second wife, Isabella of Portugal, this little girl was about as likely to become queen as a jester was to become a noble. But hey, history loves an underdog. At the time of Isabella's birth, the Castilian court was a bit of a mess. Think of it as a royal reality show without the cameras. Her half-brother, Henry Roman IV, affectionately dubbed Henry the Impotent, a nickname that makes high school taunts look tame, was on the throne. Henry's reign was, let's say, less than effective. Picture a king trying to rule with one hand tied behind his back and the other juggling political crises. His lack of heirs and questionable competence left the door wide open for power plays, and Isabella was right in the mix. Now, if you're imagining Isabella as a quiet wallflower, think again. Even as a teenager, she had the steely resolve of a seasoned diplomat. She was the kind of girl who could smile sweetly while plotting her next strategic move. When she was just 3, her father died, leaving her family in an awkward spot at the court. Her mother, plagued by mental health issues, moved Isabella and her brother Alfonso to the safety of the countryside, away from the scheming nobles of Madrid. This early taste of political maneuvering was probably more valuable than any royal tutor could teach. By the time she was 13, Isabella was already being touted as a potential pawn in the grand chess game of European alliances. But she had other ideas. Her first major test came when her brother Alfonso died in 1468, which suddenly made her a major player in the power poker game of the Castilian succession. Despite her youth, she was already proving to be a master of the bluff. Henry Roman IV, recognizing her potential as a stabilizing force, named her his heir, an unprecedented move that was about as expected as a snowstorm in Seville. Isabella's path to the throne wasn't going to be a simple coronation march. She had to navigate the treacherous waters of marriage politics. Enter Ferdinand of Aragon, a man whose name sounds like he should be jousting or dragon-slaying. Ferdinand was a match not just made in heaven, but also in the political strategy rooms of Castile and Aragon. Their marriage in 1469 was a union that would eventually unite Spain, marking the beginning of a power couple that would make Beyoncé and Jay-Z look like amateurs. The wedding itself was a covert affair, held in the town of Valladolid. You might think of it as the medieval equivalent of eloping to Vegas, except instead of Elvis officiating, they had a bishop. Although Ferdinand was a handsome 17-year-old, he was also a man with a mission. This wasn't just a marriage. It was a merger, a dynastic alliance that promised to bring together two of the most powerful kingdoms on the Iberian Peninsula. Their union was so secretive that Ferdinand had to sneak into Castile dressed as a merchant. Talk about a royal undercover operation. Now, if you think Isabella was just a damsel waiting to be rescued by her knight in shining armor, think again. She was more of a CEO than a princess, meticulously planning her next move. She demanded a prenup of sorts, ensuring her own rights and powers in the partnership, which was almost as radical as a woman CEO in a Fortune 500 company today. This was no fairy tale. It was a calculated risk on both their parts, and it paid off spectacularly. As queen, Isabella wasn't content to sit on her throne and knit. In 1474, when the crown was finally placed on her head, she faced immediate challenges. The Castilian nobility wasn't exactly thrilled about a woman in charge, and they weren't shy about showing it. But Isabella had a knack for turning adversity into advantage. She enacted reforms, strengthened the monarchy, and even managed to keep her contentious nobles in line with a combination of charm and iron will. Let's not sugarcoat it. Ruling wasn't all sunshine and siestas. Political landscape of the Iberian Peninsula was as rugged as the Sierra Nevada. Isabella had to contend with a host of challenges, from external threats like the Portuguese to internal squabbles with unruly nobles. Yet, through it all, She maintained her focus on unifying Spain, setting the stage for what would become one of the most powerful nations in Europe. In the end, Isabella's unlikely rise to power was no fluke. It was the product of shrewd political acumen, strategic marriages, and a touch of fortuitous timing. She was a force to be reckoned with, a woman who broke through the glass ceiling with a scepter in hand. Her journey to the throne was anything but a fairy tale. It was a testament to the power of perseverance and cunning in a world dominated by men. And that, dear friends, is how Isabella set the stage for a new era in Spanish history, all while managing to keep a smile on her face. As Isabella settled into her role as queen, it became clear she wasn't going to be the monarch who sat back and let the kingdom run itself. This was a woman who rolled up her sleeves and got into the nitty-gritty of governance like it was an extreme sport. And oh boy, did she have her hands full. Her domestic policies were a blend of ambition and shrewdness, designed to centralize power and bring about unity, not exactly a walk in the park when your nobles are more rebellious than a classroom full of teenagers on a sugar high. One of her first moves was cleaning up the mess of corruption and inefficiency that plagued her court. She was like the Marie Kondo of medieval Spain, tidying up the chaotic finances and ensuring taxes were collected with the precision of a Swiss watch. The royal treasury, which had been emptier than a tapa's plate at a party, saw a much-needed boost. She even instituted legal reforms to make sure justice wasn't just a concept, but an actual practice. It was as if she handed out copies of How to Run a Kingdom for Dummies to her officials. But let's not pretend Isabella was just a benevolent ruler with a keen sense of justice. Her reign also saw the infamous Spanish Inquisition, which was less about Monty Python sketches and more about rooting out religious dissent with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Established in 1478, with the blessing of Pope Sixtus Roman IV, the Inquisition was a tool for religious uniformity. And boy, did it come with a hefty price tag. Historians estimate the cost of the Inquisition could have fed entire cities with churros for decades. We're talking about a budget that could rival the GDP of a small country. The Inquisition's aim was to ensure that Spain was a Catholic stronghold, pure and simple. But the methods were anything but pure. Torture, forced confessions, and executions became the grim hallmarks of this dark chapter. It's hard to romanticize burning people at the stake, but hey, that's history for you. Sometimes it's more horror story than fairy tale. The human cost was staggering. Tens of thousands were tried, and thousands met their end in the most gruesome ways imaginable, all in the name of religious purity. It was as if the kingdom had taken a collective dive into paranoia, with Isabella steering the ship. Meanwhile, on the geopolitical chessboard, Isabella and Ferdinand were orchestrating the Reconquista, the campaign to reclaim the Iberian Peninsula from Muslim rule. This was no small task. We're talking about a centuries-long struggle that made the War of the Roses look like a backyard brawl. By the time Isabella took the throne, the Muslim-held Kingdom of Granada was the last bastion of Islamic rule in Spain, a glittering prize that she and Ferdinand had set their eyes on. The Granada War began in 1482 and lasted a decade, costing a princely sum. The royal coffers hemorrhaged gold, but the duo was determined. This was more than just a land grab. It was a defining moment in their quest for a unified Spain. The economic toll was significant. Military campaigns are never cheap, especially when you're dealing with the logistics of medieval warfare. But the rewards were tantalizing, not just in land, but in the symbolic victory of a united Christian Spain. Isabella's role in the Reconquista was more than just ceremonial. She was actively involved in the planning and execution of military strategies. Imagine a queen who wasn't afraid to don armor and ride into the thick of it, rallying her troops with the kind of fervor that would make any motivational speaker proud. She was a force of nature, and her determination was contagious. Of course, this begs the question, was Isabella a benevolent ruler or just a master of medieval PR? Her reign was a tapestry of contradictions. On one hand, she brought stability and a semblance of unity to a fragmented Spain. On the other, her policies often came with a human cost that was impossible to ignore. She was a woman who understood the power of image, crafting a legacy that would endure through the ages, warts and all. The Reconquista finally culminated in 1492 with the fall of Granada, marking the end of Muslim rule in Spain. It was a triumph that resonated throughout Europe, a testament to Isabella's relentless pursuit of her vision. But it also paved the way for the expulsion of the Jews from Spain, a decision that added yet another layer of complexity to her legacy. The Edict of Expulsion, ordered in the same year as Columbus's voyage, an event funded by Isabella herself, was a move that intertwined economic, religious, and social dynamics in a way that left an indelible mark on history. The Jews, who had been integral to Spanish society, were forced to convert, leave, or face the Inquisition. This mass exodus drained Spain of its skilled artisans, merchants, and financiers, a decision that would have long-term economic consequences. Talk about shooting yourself in the foot. The loss of such a vibrant community was a blow from which Spain would take years to recover. As we dig deeper into Isabella's reign, the myth of the benevolent queen and the harsh reality of her policies become increasingly intertwined. It's easy to get caught up in the romanticized version of her story. After all, who doesn't love a good underdog tale? But the truth is, Isabella was a complex figure, wielding power with both elegance and ruthlessness. The legacy she left behind is a testament to her indomitable will, but it's also a reminder of the costs that often accompany great ambition. As we continue to explore her reign, we'll delve further into the economic impacts of her policies, the social repercussions of her decisions, and the ways in which her legacy continues to shape Spain and beyond. Isabella was a queen who left an indelible mark on history, and her story is far from over. So, buckle up, because the ride through 15th century Spain is just getting started. In the often unpredictable theatre of European power plays, 1492 was the year the curtain rose on a new act. And in the spotlight, Queen Isabella, with her eye-catching blend of ambition and, let's face it, a penchant for cartographic curiosities. Yes, this was the year she decided to roll the dice on Christopher Columbus, a man who might have been more at home in a Monty Python sketch than a serious discussion about global exploration. But hey, history is full of surprises, and Isabella's gamble would turn out to be one of the most transformative, albeit complicated, ventures ever undertaken. Columbus, an Italian with a penchant for bold ideas and a navigational sense that was, shall we say, optimistic, had been hawking his grand vision of a westward route to Asia around Europe's royal courts like a medieval door-to-door salesman. After being shown the door by Portugal and England, he finally found a receptive ear in Isabella. Was she captivated by his vision of untold riches wading just across the Atlantic, or was she merely charmed by the fantastical maps he waved around like a magician's assistant? Perhaps a bit of both. With Isabella's support, Columbus set sail on August 3, 1492, in what was arguably the world's first low-budget, high-stakes reality show. His fleet consisted of just 3 ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, names that would soon be etched into the annals of history. The journey was fraught with challenges, including a near mutiny when the sailors realized that, "Are we there yet?" wasn't going to cut it as a navigational strategy. The economic motivations behind Isabella's decision were as layered as a Spanish tortilla. Spain, flush from the Reconquista, but financially stretched, needed new revenue streams to bolster its economy. With the spice trade being the medieval equivalent of a tech boom, the idea of finding a direct route to Asia was tantalizing. The potential for trade with the East promised wealth that could outshine even the brightest Andalusian sunshine. Isabella, ever the shrewd strategist, saw Columbus's voyage as a relatively small investment for the potential of monumental returns. But let's not pretend Isabella was purely an economic opportunist. There was also a significant political dimension to her decision. The discovery of new lands would not only fill the royal coffers, but also solidify Spain's status as a burgeoning power on the European stage. In the competitive arena of international prestige, planting the Spanish flag in uncharted territories was akin to strutting down the red carpet in a dazzling new gown. It was an opportunity too good to pass up, and Isabella was determined to seize it. And seize it she did. Columbus's voyage, while not exactly delivering on its promise of a westward passage to Asia, did result in the discovery of a whole new world, quite literally. On October 12, 1492, Columbus and his crew landed in the Bahamas, marking the beginning of a new era of exploration and colonization. The implications of this discovery were profound, setting the stage for what would become Spain's golden age. This newfound world was like a pirate's treasure chest, brimming with resources and opportunities. Gold, silver, and other commodities began to flow back to Spain, fueling its economy and transforming it into one of the richest and most powerful nations of the 16th century. The economic boom that followed was unprecedented, funding the arts, sciences, and architecture in a way that would leave an indelible mark on history. It's as if Spain had hit the jackpot at the world's largest casino, and Isabella was holding the winning ticket. But before you start romanticizing Isabella as some benevolent benefactor of exploration, it's important to note the darker side of this golden glow. The colonization of the Americas came at an enormous human cost. Indigenous populations were decimated by disease, warfare, and enslavement, a tragic consequence of the European quest for land and wealth. It's a stark reminder that history's pages are often stained with the blood of those who paid the price for imperial ambition. In the grand scheme of things, Isabella's support for Columbus's voyage was both a visionary leap and a calculated risk. It was a decision that reflected her dual nature as a ruler, pragmatic and ruthless, yet capable of dreaming big. Her legacy as the queen who helped launch the age of exploration is as complex as the maps Columbus used to navigate his way across the uncharted seas. She was a woman who dared to look beyond the horizon, even if the reality of what lay beyond was far from the utopia she might have imagined. As Spain's empire expanded, so too did its influence, paving the way for the cultural and economic blossoming that defined its golden age. Yet, the glimmering facade of progress concealed an underbelly of exploitation and suffering. It's a duality that defines much of history, the triumphs of a few often built on the backs of the many. As we continue to untangle Isabella's story, it's clear that her reign was a tapestry woven with both triumph and tragedy, a testament to her enduring impact on the world. In this intricate dance of power, vision, and reality, Isabella's story is far from over. As we delve further into the implications of her decisions, we'll explore how this newfound empire shaped the geopolitical landscape of the time and how the seeds of Spain's global influence were sown. So, stay tuned as we navigate the waters of history, one knot at a time, through the legacy of a queen whose reach extended far beyond her own shores. As Spain's empire expanded, and its influence grew like a balloon on a helium binge, Isabella's personal life was anything but an afterthought. Behind the scenes, her family was embroiled in enough drama to make Shakespeare's plays look like light comedies. Isabella's dynastic ambitions were as fierce as her political ones, and the product of those ambitions would ripple across Europe for generations. Isabella and Ferdinand had 5 children who were essentially the medieval version of a power lineup, each poised to extend their parents' legacy. Let's start with Isabella's eldest, Isabella of Aragon, who became Queen of Portugal. Her marriage was part of Isabella and Ferdinand's grand strategy to create a web of alliances across Europe. Unfortunately, the union was short-lived, as Isabella of Aragon died in childbirth in 1498, a grim reminder of the era's harsh realities. Yet, her brief life played a crucial role in the dynastic chessboard, as her son, Miguel da Paz, was the great hope for uniting Spain and Portugal. Sadly, young Miguel's life was cut short at just 2 years old, snuffing out that dream faster than you can say Iberian Union. Next up, we have Joanna, or Juana la Loca, as history rather unkindly remembers her. Born in 1479, Joanna was set to be a mere political pawn, but she ended up holding more power than anyone anticipated, or perhaps wanted. She married Philip the Handsome of Burgundy, a man whose looks were as celebrated as his political ambitions. Together, they had 6 children, including the future Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. Joanna's story took a darker turn as she reportedly descended into madness after Philip's death in 1506. Her mental health struggles, whether exacerbated by grief or political manipulation, became a tool for others to control her, illustrating how mental illness was often misunderstood and exploited during the period. Her life was a tragic tapestry woven with threads of power, love, and despair. Then there's John, Prince of Asturias, the golden boy of the family, born in 1478. Groomed to inherit the thrones of Castile and Aragon, his future looked as bright as a sunny day in Seville. But fate had other plans. John married Margaret of Austria in a union that was more about dynastic clout than romance. Unfortunately, John died in 1497 at the tender age of 19, presumably from tuberculosis, leaving his parents devastated and their succession plans in disarray. Catherine of Aragon, Isabella's youngest daughter, was thrust into the spotlight as the first wife of England's Henry Roman VIII. Her marriage was a strategic alliance meant to bolster Spain's influence in England. We all know how that turned out. Poor Catherine found herself caught in Henry's matrimonial machinations, which ultimately led to the creation of the Church of England. Talk about unintended consequences. Her life was a testament to the precariousness of royal marriages, where personal happiness was often sacrificed on the altar of political necessity. And lastly, there's Maria of Aragon, who became Queen of Portugal after marrying King Manuel I. Her marriage was part of the continued effort to unite the Iberian Peninsula through familial bonds. She bore 10 children, cementing her role as a key player in the dynastic jigsaw puzzle that Isabella and Ferdinand were so adept at assembling. Now let's zoom in on Charles V, Isabella's infamous grandson, and arguably the most significant heir to her legacy. Born in 1500, Charles was a product of the complex web of alliances Isabella had woven. By the time he hit his 20s, he had more titles than a medieval library: King of Spain, Archduke of Austria, and Holy Roman Emperor, to name a few. His reign was the zenith of the Habsburg Empire's power, a sprawling dominion where the sun quite literally never set. Charles inherited a world that was both vast and volatile, thanks in large part to his grandmother's maneuvering. Charles's reign was marked by constant warfare, religious upheaval, and the struggle to maintain control over his far-flung territories. He faced the formidable challenge of the Protestant Reformation, which was like a wildfire spreading across his domains. While he attempted to keep the Catholic faith intact, the religious schism proved to be an indomitable force. His rule exemplified the burden of having too much empire and too little control, a theme as old as empires themselves. Despite the grandeur of his reign, Charles's life was riddled with personal and political challenges. He famously abdicated in 1556, weary of the relentless demands of ruling an unwieldy empire. He retreated to a monastery in Spain, leaving behind a legacy that was as complex as the alliances his grandmother had forged. His reign was a testament to the enduring impact of Isabella's dynastic ambitions, but also a cautionary tale about the perils of overextension. Isabella's family saga reads like a medieval soap opera, full of intrigue, ambition, and tragedy. Her children and grandchildren were pawns and players in a grand Game of Thrones, each carrying forth her vision in their own way. Through them, Isabella's influence echoed across the centuries, shaping the course of European politics long after her death. As we continue to explore her legacy, it's clear that Isabella was more than just a queen. She was a master strategist whose family ties bound Europe in a complex dance of power and politics. Her story is a reminder that behind every historical figure are personal tales that shape their public personas. So, stay tuned as we delve deeper into the economic and political ramifications of her reign, with plenty of twists and turns still to come in our historical journey. As the curtain falls on the soap opera of Isabella's dynastic ambitions, it's time to assess the impact of this queen, who was as much a product of her times as a shaper of them. Her reign was a blend of political cunning, strategic marriages, and a dash of serendipity that made her one of history's most compelling figures. So, was Isabella's unification of Spain a stroke of genius, or merely a case of being in the right place at the right time? Let's dig into the layers of her legacy to find out. Isabella's story is often told as a tale of destiny, a narrative driven by her unwavering determination to unify a fragmented Iberian peninsula under a single crown. But here's the kicker. While her vision and resolve were undeniable, the timing of her reign was fortuitous. The political landscape of late 15th century Spain was ripe for consolidation. The Reconquista had set the stage, weakening regional powers and creating a vacuum for a strong leader to step in. Isabella was that leader, but it was her ability to capitalize on these conditions that marked her as exceptional. Mythos of Isabella as the benevolent unifier is appealing, but history is rarely that simple. Her consolidation of power was as much about strategic marriages and realpolitik as it was about visionary leadership. The marriage to Ferdinand of Aragon wasn't just a romantic union. It was a masterstroke of political strategy. Together, they formed a partnership that could rival any corporate merger, unifying Castile and Aragon not just in name, but in purpose. Their combined efforts helped solidify a centralized Spanish state, setting the framework for a burgeoning European power. Yet, let's not forget the economic realities that drove her reign. The unification of Spain was as much a financial necessity as it was a political ambition. The nation was in dire need of economic rejuvenation after years of costly wars and political instability. Isabella's reforms, from revamping the tax system to ensuring the crown's financial independence, were critical in stabilizing the economy. These measures weren't just about keeping the royal treasury stocked. They were about laying the groundwork for a more prosperous nation. But here's where the story takes a darker turn. Isabella's policies often came with a human cost that history can't ignore. The Spanish Inquisition, for instance, was a tool of religious and political consolidation that cast a long shadow over her legacy. Established with the aim of enforcing Catholic orthodoxy, it became a means of control that instilled fear across the land. The economic impact was profound, as the expulsion of the Jews in 1492 stripped Spain of a vital and vibrant community, leading to a talent drain that would haunt the nation for decades. Fast forward to the modern world, and Isabella's legacy is still palpable. Her reign laid the foundation for Spain's golden age, a time when Spanish influence stretched across continents, fueled by the wealth of the New World. This era of exploration and expansion reshaped global trade routes and had lasting implications for the world's economic and political landscape. The echoes of her decisions are still felt today, from the cultural footprint of the Spanish language to the enduring influence of Hispanic culture worldwide. Yet, modern perspectives invite us to question the romanticized narrative of Isabella's reign. Was her vision of a unified Spain truly benevolent, or was it a calculated move to consolidate power at any cost? The reality is probably a mix of both. Isabella was a woman of her time, navigating a world where power was often wielded through force and fear. Her story is one of ambition and contradiction, a reminder that history's heroes are often as flawed as the times in which they lived. So, as we close the book on Isabella's story, what can we take away from her legacy? Perhaps it's the realization that history is a complex tapestry, woven from threads of triumph and tragedy, vision and consequence. Isabella's unification of Spain was a defining moment, not just for the nation, but for the world. It was a testament to her indomitable will and strategic brilliance, but also a cautionary tale about the costs of ambition. In the end, Isabella's impact endures not because of the myths that surround her, but because of the very real consequences of her decisions. Her reign was a catalyst for change, both positive and negative, and her legacy is a mirror reflecting the complexities of power. As we look back on her life, we're reminded that history is not just a collection of dates and events, but a narrative of human experience, shaped by the choices of those who dared to dream. And sometimes, those dreams came with a price. In the crazy world of 7th century BCE Athens, politics wasn't just a game, it was a blood sport. Picture a city where power didn't just corrupt, it was the family heirloom. Athens was the kind of place where tyrants popped up like mushrooms after a rainstorm. But let's not get too enamored with the cinematic allure of these so-called tyrants. They weren't the misunderstood rebels of ancient lore. They were more like the original reality TV villains, grabbing power with all the subtlety of a bull in a china shop. Picture Draco, the guy who thought the best way to maintain order was to execute people for stealing cabbages. His laws were so brutal that they left a mark on our vocabulary. Ever heard the term draconian? Yeah, that's him. But Draco's iron-fisted approach didn't exactly win hearts or minds. It just cranked up the chaos to 11. Amidst this backdrop of political musical chairs, enter Sarlan, a man with a plan and the audacity to shake things up. Sarlan was what you'd call the original political maverick, and not just because he had a penchant for travel that would make a modern-day backpacker blush. He was the guy who strolled into Athens' mess and thought, you know what this place needs? A little less tyranny and a little more sanity. But before we get too ahead of ourselves, let's talk about why Athens was such a mess in the first place. Imagine an economy so precarious that even a sneeze could send it tumbling into ruin. Agriculture was the name of the game, and if your harvest failed, you weren't just out of luck, you were out of freedom. The Athenian landowners were loan sharks with fields, lending seeds and equipment at insane interest rates. And when the peasants couldn't pay up, their collateral was their own freedom. That's right. Fail to pay, and you or your family could wind up as slaves. It was a debt trap, so vicious it would make a modern payday loan look like a charitable donation. Sarlan, our reforming hero, took one look at this economic snake pit and decided to do something radical. He cancelled those crushing debts and freed the enslaved citizens. It was like pressing the reset button on a city teetering on the edge of ruin. Now, imagine the collective sigh of relief. But don't get too comfy. This wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. Sarlan's reforms were a mixed bag. Sure, they stopped the immediate bleeding, but they didn't exactly catapult Athens into prosperity overnight. Sarlan's idea of restructuring wasn't just about economic salvation. It was about laying the groundwork for something new, something radical. He introduced the concept of political participation, where power wasn't just the birthright of the elite. It was a move as bold as putting pineapples on a pizza. But unlike the culinary controversy, this one had staying power. Under Sarlan's new rules, citizens were classified into 4 groups based on their wealth, giving more Athenians a say in government than ever before. It wasn't democracy as we know it, but it was the first step on a long and winding road. Of course, Sarlan didn't just micromanage from the sidelines. He was a poet, too, crafting verses that doubled as political manifestos. In one of his poems, he famously remarked, "I gave to the people as much privilege as they had the strength to take." This wasn't just a catchy line. It was a call to action, urging Athenians to take ownership of their future. Sarlan's reforms were like a breath of fresh air in a room that had been sealed shut for far too long, but they also required the Athenians to wake up and smell the olive oil. Now, let's address the myth-busting elephant in the room. Sarlan is often painted as the enlightened reformer who single-handedly saved Athens. While he certainly deserves credit, let's not overlook the inconvenient truth. His reforms weren't exactly a one-size-fits-all solution. There were plenty of folks who grumbled about the changes, particularly the aristocrats who suddenly found their grip on power-slipping. And while Sarlan's debt cancellations were a godsend for many, they didn't magically resolve the underlying economic disparities. Despite the bumps and bruises, Sarlan's reforms sparked a political evolution that would eventually lead to democracy. But before we get there, we need to appreciate the sheer audacity of his vision. Sarlan wasn't just tinkering with the system. He was rewriting the rulebook, and while he may not have been able to stick around to see the full fruits of his labor, thanks to that aforementioned wanderlust, his legacy was like a seed planted in rocky soil. It took time to grow, but when it did, it changed the course of history. As we close this chapter on Sarlan's early reforms, it's worth reflecting on the chaos that sparked such radical change. Athens was a city on the brink, where political power was as volatile as the Aegean Sea during a storm. Sarlan's efforts were a beacon of hope in a world where tyranny was the norm. And while his reforms didn't solve every problem, they set Athens on a path toward something new and unprecedented. As we move forward in our journey through ancient Greek democracy, remember Sarlan's legacy, a reminder that even in the darkest times, a single voice can light the way to a brighter future. As we shift our gaze from Sarlan's groundbreaking, if imperfect, reforms, let's roll out the red carpet for the next star of our Athenian political drama, Cleisthenes. If Sarlan was the guy who got the ball rolling, Cleisthenes was the one who kicked it downfield with a fervor that would put any modern-day soccer player to shame. He was the architect of democracy, and yes, that title sounds grandiose, but stick with me, because this wasn't just a case of slapping a label on a system that already existed. Cleisthenes was about to take Athens on a roller coaster ride from aristocratic oligarchy to a form of government where even the least likely of citizens could find themselves in a seat of power. Now, don't go picturing Cleisthenes as some idealist with a laurel wreath of equality perched on his head. His motives weren't purely altruistic. The guy had his own political skin in the game. You see, Athens was knee-deep in a power struggle between rival factions, and Cleisthenes' own clan, the Alcmeonids, was vying for supremacy. In a bold move that could have been ripped from the pages of a Machiavellian thriller, he decided to sidestep the usual aristocratic power plays by winning the support of the common people. Instead of courting the traditional power brokers, he expanded the political playing field to include a broader swath of Athenians. Talk about thinking outside the box, or in this case, the palace. Let's break down what Cleisthenes did that was so radical. First up, the assembly, or ecclesia, as locals called it. This wasn't your average town hall meeting where a few folks showed up to complain about potholes. Oh no, the assembly was a monumental affair where any male citizen over the age of 20 could have a say. That's right. Cleisthenes basically flung open the doors of political participation like a Black Friday sale, inviting every Josephius and their brother to get involved. If you were a free male citizen, you were in. Women, slaves, and foreigners, not so much. It was progressive for its time, but let's not pretend it was a utopia of inclusivity. The assembly wasn't just a place to air grievances. It was the beating heart of Athenian democracy. This was where laws were proposed, policies debated, and decisions made. Imagine the cacophony of voices, the clashing of ideas, a veritable symphony of democracy in action. And while it sounds a bit chaotic, it was also revolutionary. For the first time, ordinary citizens could influence decisions that affected their lives. The assembly wasn't just a political tool, it was a social equalizer, offering a stage where the common man could stand shoulder to shoulder with the city's elite. But Cleisthenes didn't stop there. He set up the Council of 500, a body that was, quite literally, a game-changer. This council was responsible for setting the agenda for the assembly, and its members were chosen by lot. Yep, you heard that right, by lot, as in random selection. This wasn't a popularity contest or a trial by combat, it was a political lottery. The idea was to ensure fairness and prevent corruption, a move that might make modern politicians break out in a nervous sweat. Imagine a system where anyone could be tapped on the shoulder and told, "Congratulations, you're now part of the governing body." It was a stroke of genius that helped to level the playing field and keep power from becoming concentrated in the hands of a few. And let's not overlook the economic context that made these changes possible. By the late 6th century BCE, Athens was starting to flex its economic muscles. The city was growing, trade was expanding, and wealth wasn't just confined to the old aristocratic families. Cleisthenes' reforms were as much about harnessing this newfound prosperity as they were about political equality. A more inclusive government meant more people had a vested interest in the city's success, and that was a recipe for growth. It was like opening a startup and turning all your employees into shareholders. Suddenly, everyone was motivated to see the company thrive. But let's not get carried away with the romance of it all. While Cleisthenes' reforms were revolutionary, they weren't without their critics. Some aristocrats were less than thrilled about sharing power with the riffraff, and the idea of selecting officials by lot wasn't universally applauded either. To some, it seemed like madness to leave the running of the city to chance. But Cleisthenes was playing the long game, betting that a broader base of participation would stabilize Athens in the long run. And while it wasn't a smooth ride, there were plenty of bumps along the way. It laid the groundwork for what would become one of the most celebrated systems of governance in history. Now, let's tackle a juicy bit of myth-busting. Democracy, as birthed by Cleisthenes, is often painted with a golden brush, a shining beacon of citizen empowerment, but the reality was a bit grittier. Yes, more people had a say, but this wasn't a full-on egalitarian society. Wealth and status still mattered, and the system was far from perfect. But what Cleisthenes did was open a door that had been sealed shut by centuries of aristocratic rule. It was the dawn of a new era, one that would see Athens rise to unprecedented heights, both politically and culturally. In dissecting Cleisthenes' reforms, we see the tension between idealism and pragmatism, between the dream of a more inclusive society and the messy reality of its implementation. It's a reminder that even the most groundbreaking of changes come with their own set of challenges. Cleisthenes wasn't just reshuffling the political deck. He was dealing a whole new hand, and the stakes were nothing less than the future of Athens itself. As we draw this part of our tale to a close, it's worth noting that Cleisthenes didn't just change the rules of the game, he changed the players as well. By democratizing the political process, he set the stage for a new kind of Athenian society, one where the voices of the many could no longer be ignored by the few. It was a bold experiment, and while it didn't solve every problem, it set Athens on a path toward becoming a true political powerhouse. Stay tuned, because the story of ancient Greek democracy is just getting started, and the best is yet to come. Now, we dive headfirst into the bustling agora of Athenian democracy, where you could almost hear the clash of metaphorical swords as much as the literal ones. The assembly meetings, or ecclesia, were the beating heart of this democratic experiment. Picture a grand amphitheater, packed to the brim with citizens, up to 6,000 of them, if you can believe it, where everything from military strategies to public spending was hashed out in a verbal free-for-all. It was less, I have a dream, and more, I have a scheme, with every citizen eager to have his voice heard above the din. This wasn't just a place for high-minded philosophical debate. Oh no, it was the ancient version of a reality TV reunion show, complete with shouting matches and dramatic walkouts. Imagine the cacophony, the heated debates, the passionate speeches, the occasional fistfights. It was democracy, yes, but it was democracy with an edge. And when things got too rowdy, a herald would call for order. You could almost picture him as the ancient equivalent of a bouncer, trying to keep the peace amidst the chaos. But let's not romanticize this as an equal opportunity forum. The ecclesia was a boys' club, plain and simple. Women, slaves, and foreigners were conspicuously absent from the political stage. It was a democracy, but with an asterisk. Now, about those infamous assembly meetings that were so dull, they had to pay people to attend. Yes, you heard that right. In an attempt to boost attendance, the Athenians devised a little incentive, a small payment known as a misthos. It was like handing out coupons for a free sandwich just to get folks to show up. This wasn't just about maintaining quorum. It was about the democratic principle that everyone should have a say, even if it meant bribing them with a few drachmas. While the assembly was the stage, ostracism was the plot twist. This was Athens' way of keeping political threats in check, and it was as dramatic as it sounds. Every year, citizens could vote to exile someone they deemed a danger to the state. If you thought cancel culture was harsh, try being ostracized for 10 years. The process was simple. Citizens would scratch the name of their least favorite politician or personal rival onto a piece of pottery known as an ostracan. If you got the most votes, congratulations, you just won an all-expenses-paid trip out of Athens. The irony: ostracism was a tool designed to protect democracy by temporarily removing those who might disrupt it. When wielded wisely, it was a safeguard. When misused, it became a political weapon. Let's not forget the economic backdrop to all this political intrigue. Athens wasn't just any city, it was a burgeoning metropolis with its fingers in many pies: trade, culture, philosophy. In the 5th century BCE, Athens was flexing its economic muscles like a bodybuilder at a beach competition. The city was a hub of commerce, with wealth flowing in from across the Mediterranean. This prosperity was the fuel that powered Athenian democracy, allowing citizens the luxury of participating in politics rather than toiling away in the fields from dawn till dusk. However, the darker side of this democratic spectacle was that it wasn't always the perfectly oiled machine we might imagine. Political factions and power struggles were as much a part of the fabric of Athenian life as the Parthenon itself. The assembly could be a place of great wisdom and foresight, but it was also where personal vendettas played out and where mob mentality sometimes reigned supreme. The idea of one man, one vote was groundbreaking, but the system wasn't immune to manipulation or the whims of the crowd. And yet, despite the noise, the chaos, and the occasional injustice, the Athenian assembly was a revolutionary concept, a place where ideas could be debated, laws could be made, and the course of the city could be charted by its citizens. It was a grand experiment in self-governance, with all the messiness that entails. As we dig deeper into the peculiarities of Athenian political life, it's essential to remember the unique blend of idealism and pragmatism that defined this era. The Athenians didn't just create a democracy, they lived it, with all its imperfections and all its potential. Their system was far from perfect, but it was a starting point, a blueprint for future generations to improve upon. In a world where tyranny was all too common, Athens dared to try something different. They dared to give power to the people, even when it meant navigating the choppy waters of public opinion and political rivalry. And so, as we prepare to turn the page on this chapter of Athenian democracy, let's carry forward the lessons of the assembly. That the power of the people is both a blessing and a challenge, that democracy is as much about compromise as it is about conviction, and that the voices of the many can shape the destiny of the few. Stay with us as we continue to unravel the story of democracy in ancient Greece, where the stakes were high, the debates were fierce, and the legacy is still unfolding. So, as we journey deeper into the multifaceted world of Athenian politics, let's rip off the rose-colored glasses and face the less glamorous truths of this so-called democracy. Brace yourself, because if you were hoping for a heartwarming tale of universal equality, you're about to be sorely disappointed. You see, Athens was a democracy that came with a hefty asterisk. Asterisk terms and conditions apply. Let's start with the guest list for this grand democratic experiment. If you were a woman, a slave, or a foreigner, you were about as welcome in the political arena as a bull in a china shop. Women, despite being half the population, were relegated to the sidelines, their political influence limited to whatever they could whisper into the ears of their male relatives. Slaves, who made up about a third of the population, had even fewer rights, unless you count the right to remain silent, and foreigners. They were categorized as medics, and while they could live in Athens and contribute to its economy, their political clout was about as significant as a gnat's sneeze. So who got to participate in this so-called democracy? The answer: free male citizens, and even then, not all were created equal. Status and wealth still played significant roles. The affluent and well-connected had more influence, while the less fortunate were often left shouting to be heard over the din of their betters. It was a system that promised much and delivered selectively, a bit like a buffet where only a few people get to fill their plates. While we're on the subject of selective participation, let's dive into the economic realities propping up this Athenian dream. Spoiler alert, it wasn't all olives and sunshine. The economy of Athens was a strange beast, a beast that thrived on the backs of those who weren't considered citizens at all. Slavery was the not-so-hidden engine driving the Athenian economy, providing the labor necessary to keep the wheels of industry and agriculture turning. It's a bitter irony. A society that prided itself on freedom and equality relied heavily on forced labor. As for trade, Athens was like the Amazon of the ancient world, acting as a bustling hub for commerce. Its strategic location made it a prime spot for trading with other city-states and regions around the Mediterranean. The Athenian agora was the beating heart of this trade network, a lively marketplace where goods and ideas flowed as freely as the gossip. But here's the kicker. Much of this prosperity was built on the backs of those who couldn't even vote on the policies affecting their lives. It was like being invited to a fantastic party, only to find out you're not allowed to dance. Now, let's talk about the myth of Athenian prosperity. Yes, Athens was thriving, but that wealth wasn't exactly spread evenly. The gap between the rich and the poor was as wide as the Aegean Sea. The wealthy elite lived in comfort, enjoying the fruits of their labor and the labor of others, while the poor scraped by, hoping to catch a break. It was a society where your birth often dictated your destiny, a hard pill to swallow for those at the bottom of the social ladder. But let's not get too downhearted. The Athenians were nothing if not inventive, and their system, imperfect as it was, laid the groundwork for future generations to build upon. They experimented with ideas that were revolutionary for their time, even if their execution was a bit wobbly. And in doing so, they set the stage for a political evolution that would echo through the ages. In this grand tapestry of Athenian democracy, it's important to see both the ideal and the reality. The dream of a society where every citizen has a voice is a powerful one, but the reality was often messier, more complex, and fraught with contradictions. It's a lesson that resonates today. Democracy is a living, breathing entity, constantly evolving and never quite reaching its final form. As we continue our exploration of ancient Greek democracy, let's keep our eyes open to both the achievements and the imperfections of those early pioneers. They were, after all, human beings trying to navigate the choppy waters of politics and society, just like us. The story of Athens is not just a tale of triumph. It's a reminder of the struggles and sacrifices that come with the quest for a better world. So stay with me, because the journey is far from over, and the best chapters are yet to be written. All right, let's dive headfirst into the legacy of Athenian democracy, the ancient system that has as many admirers as it does critics. If we were to map out its impact, we'd be looking at a sprawling family tree where every branch represents a different political system or thinker inspired by this Greek prototype. Call it the granddaddy of governance if you will, but like any family elder, it passed down more than just good genes. There were a few eccentricities in the mix too. Fast forward to the Age of Enlightenment, and you'll find political philosophers like Montesquieu and Rousseau rummaging through the attic of history and bringing Athenian ideas out into the daylight. Montesquieu took one look at the Athenian system and thought, hey, there's something to this separation of powers. And thus, he championed the idea of dividing government authority into distinct branches, a concept that would later become a cornerstone of modern democracies, like the United States with its executive, legislative, and judicial branches. Speaking of the United States, the Founding Fathers were quite the history buffs, and they weren't shy about borrowing a page or two from the Athenian playbook. Take James Madison, for example. He studied the Athenian democracy and saw both its beauty and its pitfalls. His takeaway: direct democracy was a bit too chaotic, like letting a toddler run a candy store. So, instead, he pushed for a representative democracy where elected officials would make the big decisions. It's like Athens' assembly meetings got a makeover, trading in the chaotic cacophony for something a tad more orderly. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. While Athens laid down the blueprint, it was far from perfect. Remember, this was a city-state where only about 10–20% of the population could actually vote. In modern terms, that's like throwing a house party and only letting the people who brought the snacks have a say in the music. Critics of Athenian democracy point out that it was a system as exclusive as a VIP club, where the bouncers were quite literally the citizenry themselves. Yet, despite its flaws, Athenian democracy had a certain allure. It was a bold experiment in self-governance at a time when the world was filled with kings, emperors, and tyrants. It dared to ask, what if ordinary people had a say in how they were ruled? And that's a question that still resonates today. This audacity to give power to the people, however messy, was a radical departure from the norm and set the stage for future political revolutions. Let's not gloss over the gritty reality, though. Athens was a democracy built on the backs of slaves and the disenfranchised, a system that promised freedom to a select few while others toiled in silence. It's a stark reminder that even the most progressive systems can have their shadows. But in acknowledging these imperfections, we also recognize the room for growth and the potential for change. As we sift through the sands of time, it's clear that Athenian democracy was a starting point, not an end game. It was the spark that lit the fire of democratic ideals, one that has been stoked and reshaped over millennia. Think of it like the original iPhone, groundbreaking in its day, but with plenty of room for upgrades. In reflecting on Athens' legacy, we're also left with the enduring myth of democracy's birthplace. It's a tale that has been romanticized and retold, often glossing over the less glamorous truths. Yet, despite the embellishments, there's a reason this story still captivates us. It's a testament to the human spirit's desire for a voice, a say in our destinies, and a chance to carve out a better future. So why does Athens still matter today? Because it reminds us that democracy is not a static state, but a work in progress. It's an ongoing conversation that invites us to question, to challenge, and to strive for something better. Athens was the first to invite the people to the table, and though the guest list was exclusive, it set a precedent for inclusivity that future generations would expand upon. As we bring our journey through ancient Greek democracy to a close, let's carry forward the lessons of Athens. Let's celebrate the audacity to experiment with governance and the courage to acknowledge flaws. Like the Athenians, we too are navigating the complexities of democracy, with all its messy, beautiful potential. And while we may not have all the answers, the story of Athens assures us that the quest for a more just and equitable society is a journey worth taking. So, here's to Athens, the city that dared to dream, to question, and to leave a legacy that still echoes through the halls of history. in the dusty cradle of ancient civilization, where modern Iran now stretches languidly under the desert sun, a young man named Cyrus was busy rewriting the playbook on empire building. Not that he had a choice. When your granddad is a king, and your father is a king, you're sort of expected to make something of yourself. But Cyrus wasn't just any royal princeling playing dress-up. He was about to become Cyrus the Great, the founder of an empire so vast it would make even the most ambitious Game of Thrones character green with envy. And it all started with a bit of family drama worthy of a soap opera. You see, Cyrus was born around 600 BCE as part of the Achaemenid clan, a group of Persians living under the thumb of the Median Empire. The Medes, led by Cyrus's grandfather Strategist, had been calling the shots for a good while. Strategist, seeing visions of his grandson toppling his empire, tried to have the infant Cyrus done away with. Spoiler alert, that plan didn't work out. Instead, Cyrus grew up to be a charismatic leader with a knack for strategy and a vision that reached far beyond the dusty plains of Persia. Now, if you think Cyrus rose to power by simply asking nicely, think again. The guy knew how to play his cards. Around 550 BCE, he led a rebellion against the Medes. The details are murkier than a coffee-shop chalkboard menu, but it said that Harpagus, a disgruntled Median general with a grudge bigger than Texas, switched sides to support Cyrus. Together, they pulled off a coup that would make even modern political strategists nod in grudging respect. The Medes were overthrown, and just like that, Cyrus was the head honcho. This was only the beginning. Cyrus's vision was as expansive as a Persian carpet. He wasn't content with just a slice of the Middle Eastern pie. No, he wanted the whole thing, and a scoop of the Mediterranean, too. But here's where Cyrus turned the typical conqueror narrative on its head. Instead of ruling with an iron fist, he opted for a more inclusive approach. Conquered peoples weren't just subjects. They were potential partners in his grand imperial project. He respected local customs and religions, a tactic that was both clever and surprisingly modern. It's like he wrote the ancient version of How to Win Friends and Influence People, centuries before Dale Carnegie was even a twinkle in his great-great-great-grandparents' eyes. But before we start handing out medals for humanitarianism, let's pump the brakes. Was Cyrus really the benevolent ruler of legend, or was he playing a calculated game of chess in which every pawn had a purpose? The truth is, his vision of a multicultural empire might have been less about holding hands and singing Cumbaya, and more about keeping the peace to maximize efficiency and, of course, profit. After all, a happy empire is a productive empire, and Cyrus had bills to pay. Expanding an empire isn't cheap, and neither is maintaining it. Let's talk economics for a moment. By the time Cyrus was done, he controlled a vast stretch of land that included the likes of Lydia, Babylon, and parts of Central Asia. We're talking a whopping 1 million square miles. That's nearly the size of the United States today. With territory came trade routes, and with trade routes came wealth. The empire's economy was a complex web, dealing in everything from spices and textiles to precious metals. And all this was lubricated by a newfangled invention, coinage. Yes, Cyrus was ruling at a time when coins were becoming the currency of choice. Charching, his conquest of Lydia around 546 BCE, brought him the legendary riches of King Croesus, who was said to be as rich as, well, Croesus. This was a game-changer, allowing Cyrus to fund his further expansions and solidify his power base. Money flowed into the empire like wine at a Greek symposium, and Cyrus made sure he kept the party going by maintaining the infrastructure and security of trade routes, especially the famed Royal Road that stretched over 600 miles, connecting the empire's far reaches. There's a certain beauty in how Cyrus managed to weave his way into the annals of history as both a great conqueror and a wise ruler. But let's not kid ourselves. The ancient world wasn't exactly a utopia of peace and love. The Persians, like everyone else, had their fair share of battles, betrayals, and beheadings, and while Cyrus might have had a softer touch than some of his contemporaries, expanding any empire involves some distinctly non-fluffy methods. Besides, the multicultural empire model wasn't just a moral choice, it was an economic one. By respecting the autonomy of different peoples, he kept unrest to a minimum, which meant fewer resources spent on quelling rebellions and more on collecting taxes. As for the romanticized tales of Cyrus, as a benevolent conqueror. History has a way of smoothing out the rough edges. Sure, Cyrus was enlightened for his time, but he wasn't exactly running a democracy. His empire was a finely tuned machine, where every decision was geared toward stability and prosperity. He was a pragmatist, not a saint, and his policies reflected a keen understanding of the power dynamics at play. In the end, Cyrus's story is a testament to the complexity of leadership and the cunning it takes to build something that lasts. His legacy isn't just in the lands he conquered or the wealth he amassed, but in the idea that power can be wielded with both strength and subtlety. And that, my friends, is why Cyrus the Great is still remembered as one of history's most influential figures. A man who, against all odds, turned a dusty corner of the ancient world into the heart of a vast empire. So, Cyrus the Great wasn't just a master of conquest. He was also a genius at playing the long game. Picture this, an empire stretching across 3 continents, and Cyrus seated at the helm, ensuring it all ran smoother than a well-oiled chariot. But maintaining such a colossal empire wasn't about resting on one's laurels, or in Cyrus's case, on a throne that probably had more gold than a Dubai skyscraper. No, the real magic trick lay in consolidating his gains and keeping the empire from crumbling like a stale pastry. Enter the famous Cyrus cylinder, often hailed as the world's first charter of human rights. This clay cylinder, dating back to 539 BCE, is more than just an ancient tweet about freedom and tolerance. Sure, it celebrated Cyrus's decree that allowed exiled peoples, like the Jews, who had been kicking their heels in Babylon for decades, to return to their homelands. But let's not get too misty-eyed. This was as much about political savvy as benevolence. By letting these folks go home and rebuild their temples, Cyrus didn't just earn goodwill. He secured loyalty from people who might otherwise have been a thorn in his imperial side. It's a bit like a Game of Thrones plot twist, where the hero looks merciful but is really just 2 steps ahead in the power game. Now, speaking of logistics, how do you even begin to govern such a sprawling empire without losing your marbles? Well, Cyrus had a plan, and it involved more than just sitting around and hoping for the best. He set up a network of roads that would make any modern urban planner swoon. The Royal Road, stretching over 600 miles from Sardis to Susa, was the ancient world's answer to the interstate highway system. It was like the Silk Road's older, more responsible sibling, and it enabled goods, armies, and messages to travel with astonishing efficiency for the time. Think of it as the ancient version of fiber-optic broadband, but with more camels and fewer data caps. But wait, there's more. Cyrus also pioneered an early form of the postal system, ensuring that messages could be relayed across the empire with the kind of speed that would make even Amazon Prime look sluggish. Couriers could cover the entire length of the Royal Road in a mere 7 days, thanks to a relay system of fresh horses and riders. This was the ancient world's FedEx, minus the tracking numbers and signature requirements. It was as if Cyrus looked at the chaos of communication and thought, we can do better. Of course, while Cyrus was busy being the world's first logistics manager, he wasn't immune to the myths that swirled around him like sandstorms. Was he truly a liberator, or just a canny ruler who knew how to spin a good PR story? The jury's still out on that one, but here's the real kicker. By portraying himself as a liberator, he kept potential rebellion at bay and secured his empire's stability. It was a classic case of perception being more powerful than reality. Cyrus knew that a happy populace was less likely to revolt, and a conquered city that felt liberated was one less city to burn to the ground. And let's not forget the economic context, a favorite topic among ancient historians and modern economists alike. Cyrus's empire was an economic powerhouse, built on the back of a vast network of trade routes that crisscrossed his territories. These routes were the lifeblood of the empire, carrying everything from spices and textiles to precious metals, and of course, those shiny new coins that everyone was so keen on. Coins, by the way, were a revolutionary concept that simplified trade and taxation, a godsend for any ruler looking to fill the imperial coffers. Cha-ching. But while the coins were clinking and the roads bustling, Cyrus wasn't just sitting back and counting his silver. He was constantly recalibrating, ensuring that his empire didn't just survive but thrived. His administration was a marvel of efficiency, with satraps, or governors, overseeing different regions, each responsible for collecting taxes and maintaining order. It was a decentralized system that allowed for local autonomy while ensuring that the empire's needs were met. It's like he invented the franchise model centuries before anyone had ever heard of a McDonald's. In the end, Cyrus's consolidation of power wasn't just about maintaining control. It was about building a sustainable empire that could weather the inevitable storms of history. His legacy, then, is one of strategic brilliance, of forging alliances, and creating an administrative framework that would endure long after his death. It's a testament to the fact that true power lies not in the conquest itself, but in the ability to maintain what you've won. Cyrus may not have been the saintly liberator of legend, but he was undoubtedly a ruler who understood the delicate balance between strength and diplomacy. And so, as we leave Cyrus for now, standing at the pinnacle of his achievements, we can't help but marvel at the sheer audacity of his vision. In a world where might often made right, Cyrus showed that sometimes the pen, or in this case the cylinder, could indeed be mightier than the sword. But don't get too comfortable with this tale of empire and enlightenment. As history has shown time and again, the tale of power is never truly finished. There are more emperors on the horizon, more battles to be fought, and more myths to be debunked. So stay tuned, because the Persian saga is just warming up. As we wave goodbye to Cyrus, basking in the glory of his empire-building prowess, let's pivot to the next act in our Persian drama. Cue the entrance of Cambyses Roman II, Cyrus's son and heir apparent. Now, if you're expecting a smooth transition of power, you might be in for a surprise. Turns out, succession in ancient empires wasn't all crownings and coronations. It was more akin to a high-stakes poker game with daggers under the table. Cambyses Roman II, unlike his father, wasn't exactly known for his charm and diplomacy. While Cyrus was off crafting multicultural harmony, Cambyses had other ideas, more along the lines of let's conquer Egypt and see what happens. Born to Cyrus and his queen, Cassandane, Cambyses took the throne after his father's death in 530 BCE. But don't think his ascension was a cakewalk. The royal court was a hotbed of intrigue, where loyalty was a commodity as unreliable as ancient Wi-Fi. As Cambyses settled into his new role, he set his sights on Egypt, the neighboring kingdom that had been thumbing its nose at Persian power. Egypt, led by Pharaoh Psamtik Roman III, was no pushover. It was a civilization with a pedigree as long as the Nile and a penchant for grandeur that would make even the Kardashians blush. But Cambyses wasn't deterred. In 525 BCE, he launched a full-scale invasion, an operation that would have made even the most jaded general raise an eyebrow. But why Egypt? Well, besides the obvious allure of pyramids and pharaohs, the economic incentives were hard to ignore. Egypt was the ancient world's equivalent of a gold mine, rich in resources like grain and minerals, not to mention its strategic position, controlling key trade routes. Capturing Egypt meant more than just adding another notch to the Persian belt. It was about securing economic dominance and expanding the empire's already impressive wealth. So, off Cambyses went, leading an army reportedly 50,000 strong through the Sinai Desert. It was no small feat. The desert was less a sandy stroll and more a grueling endurance test, but with some clever logistics. Thanks to the support of the Arabs, who provided crucial water supplies, Cambyses managed to march his troops into Egypt. The ensuing Battle of Pelusium was a decisive moment, with Persian forces defeating the Egyptians in a clash that relied as much on psychological warfare as brute force. Legend has it that Cambyses used cats, sacred animals in Egypt, as part of his strategy, knowing the Egyptians would hesitate to harm them. It was a cunning move that showcased Cambyses' strategic mind, albeit one with a morally questionable twist. With victory came the spoils, and Cambyses made himself at home in Egypt, declaring himself pharaoh. But here's where things get murky, and the myth-making machine kicks into overdrive. Cambyses' rule in Egypt is often overshadowed by tales of his so-called madness, stories that paint him as an unstable tyrant prone to fits of rage and sacrilege. Herodotus, the Greek historian with a flair for the dramatic, tells us that Cambyses desecrated temples, slaughtered sacred animals, and even killed his own family members in a fit of paranoia. But how much of this is fact, and how much is ancient tabloid fodder? The madness of Cambyses is a story that's as captivating as it is questionable. On one hand, it highlights the perils of absolute power and the psychological toll of empire building. On the other, it serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of relying on biased sources. Herodotus, after all, wasn't exactly a neutral observer. His accounts, while colorful, often read more like a historical novel than a factual report. So, while Cambyses may not have been a poster child for mental stability, it's worth considering the political motivations behind these stories. Was he genuinely unhinged, or were these tales spun by Egyptian priests and Greek chroniclers with axes to grind against their Persian overlords? Economically, Cambyses' conquest of Egypt was a boon for the empire. The fertile Nile Delta became a breadbasket for Persia, feeding its armies and filling its coffers. Control of Egypt also meant access to its bustling ports and the lucrative trade networks that extended across the Mediterranean and beyond. Cambyses wasn't just expanding territory, he was strategically enhancing Persia's economic muscle. But as with all things in history, the glory of conquest came with its own set of challenges. Governing Egypt required more than just military might. It demanded a delicate balance of power and diplomacy, a skill Cambyses hadn't quite inherited from his father. His attempts to impose Persian customs on the Egyptian populace often backfired, leading to unrest and resentment. It was a classic case of cultural collision, where the conqueror's vision of unity clashed with the conquered's desire for autonomy. As Cambyses struggled to maintain his grip on Egypt, rumors of his madness continued to swirl, fueled by tales of his increasingly erratic behavior. Whether these stories were true or exaggerated, they underscore a timeless truth about power. It's as much about perception as reality. And in the court of public opinion, Cambyses' reputation was anything but favorable. So, what do we make of Cambyses Roman II? Was he a mad king driven by delusions of grandeur, or a misunderstood ruler caught in the crossfire of cultural and political conflict? The answer, as always, lies somewhere in between. Like his father, Cambyses understood the economic and strategic importance of expansion, but his heavy-handed approach and rumored instability left a legacy that's as divisive as it is intriguing. In the grand tapestry of the Persian Empire, Cambyses' reign was a vivid, albeit turbulent, chapter. His campaign in Egypt added a new dimension to the empire's reach, while his alleged madness offered a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power. As we move forward in our exploration of the Persian saga, we'll see how the threads of Cambyses' legacy weave into the broader narrative of an empire that, despite its internal dramas, continued to shape the course of history. After all, the story of Persia is far from over, and there are more twists and turns to come. Stay tuned, because the next act is just around the corner, and it promises to be every bit as riveting as the last. As Cambyses' Roman II turbulent reign wrapped up in a cloud of mystery and madness, the Persian Empire found itself at a crossroads. Cambyses didn't leave a neat will and testament, nor a tidy succession plan, because why make things easy in a world where chaos is practically a family tradition? The power vacuum left by his demise in 522 BCE was as unsettling as finding out your favorite historical figure was maybe not the saint you thought they were. Enter Darius, a figure whose rise to power was as dramatic as a soap opera finale. He wasn't the next in line by any stretch, but in the Game of Thrones, Persian edition, Darius played a hand that would have made even Machiavelli proud. The guy wasn't just some opportunistic noble. He was a distant cousin of Cambyses, with a pedigree that made him a legitimate contender for the throne, at least in his own eyes. But before we crown Darius as the solution to Persia's problems, let's set the stage. The empire was in turmoil, with revolts popping up like historical whack-a-mole. Darius's first order of business was to deal with a little issue known as the usurpation by a guy named Gormada. This fellow claimed to be Bardia, Cambyses' brother, and managed to convince quite a few folks of his legitimacy. Now, whether Gormada was an impostor or the real deal is a mystery wrapped in an enigma. But Darius wasn't about to let him keep the throne. After a bit of good old-fashioned palace intrigue, complete with conspiracies and a coup, Darius emerged victorious in what you might call a highly contested election without the ballots. Fast forward to Darius's consolidation of power, and you've got a ruler who knew the importance of good PR. Enter the Behistun inscription, Darius's version of a viral tweet, only it was carved into a mountain instead of posted online. This monumental cuneiform script, etched high on a cliff in modern-day Iran, is essentially a resume of Darius's exploits, complete with a list of enemies vanquished and lands conquered. The inscription is part historical record, part propaganda, and part ancient humblebrag. Picture it, Darius standing atop a literal mountain, proclaiming his right to rule not just through conquest, but divine mandate. It's the ancient world's equivalent of a blue checkmark on Twitter, only with a bit more gravitas. But being a king isn't just about winning battles and carving your name into rocks. Darius understood the empire needed more than just a figurehead. It needed a functioning bureaucracy. He set about creating an administrative system that would make any modern civil servant weep with envy. The empire was divided into satrapies, essentially provinces, each governed by a satrap who had the delightful job of collecting taxes and maintaining order. Of them as regional managers in the world's largest corporate structure, reporting back to the CEO, Darius himself. This system wasn't just about keeping the empire's wheels greased. It was about ensuring that wealth flowed smoothly into the imperial treasury. And speaking of wealth, let's talk currency. Darius introduced the daric, a gold coin that became the standard currency across the empire. It was a stroke of economic genius, simplifying trade and taxation, and underscoring the empire's financial might. Imagine the clink of darics echoing through the bustling markets of Babylon or the port cities of the Mediterranean. It was the sound of an economy that could rival any in the ancient world. Of course, all this administrative brilliance wasn't just for show. Darius faced revolts across the empire, from rebellious Babylonians to restless Egyptians, each eager to test the limits of Persian tolerance. But Darius, ever the strategist, quashed these uprisings with a mix of military force and diplomatic finesse. The message was clear. Rebellion was futile, and the Persian Empire was here to stay. Yet, while Darius was busy putting out fires, he never lost sight of the bigger picture. He knew that an empire couldn't thrive on force alone, so he fostered a network of roads and communication that would make even the most efficient postal service blush. The Royal Road, already a marvel of infrastructure, was expanded and maintained, ensuring that messages and goods could traverse the empire with unprecedented speed. It was as if Darius had taken Cyrus's logistical playbook and added a few new chapters, making Persia not just a political powerhouse, but a commercial juggernaut. But let's not kid ourselves. Darius was no saintly ruler presiding over a utopian empire. He wielded his power with a blend of pragmatism and ruthlessness, understanding that sometimes a velvet glove can conceal an iron fist. His reign was marked by both prosperity and oppression, a testament to the dual nature of power itself. As we navigate the complexities of his rule, we're reminded that history is never as simple as the legends suggest. Darius's legacy isn't just about the battles he won or the laws he enacted. It's about the empire he forged and the systems he established, systems that would influence the ancient world long after his time. So, while the Behistun inscription may tell the story of a king divinely chosen to rule, the truth is that Darius's success lay not in divine favor, but in his ability to adapt, innovate, and govern an empire that was as diverse as it was vast. With Darius at the helm, the Persian Empire was not just a collection of conquered lands, but a sophisticated entity that understood the art of governance. His reign was a masterclass in statecraft, proving that sometimes the most enduring legacies are those built on the bedrock of bureaucracy and coinage, rather than the shifting sands of conquest and rebellion. As we leave Darius to continue his rule, we can look forward to more tales of intrigue, power, and the endless pursuit of empire. The Persian saga is far from over, and the next chapter promises to be just as thrilling as the last. As Darius settled into his role as the empire's CEO, he knew that a kingdom wasn't just about territory, it was about connectivity. So, he laid the groundwork for an infrastructural renaissance that would make any modern city planner do a double take. The Royal Road, already a marvel of ancient engineering, was expanded like a teenager's social media presence. Stretching over 600 miles from Sardis to Susa, it was the express lane of the ancient world, ensuring that messages, troops, and traders could trek across Persia faster than you could say, Silk Road. But Darius wasn't content with merely paving roads. No, he had his sights set on waterways too. Picture the Suez Canal, But in ancient Persia, Darius initiated the construction of a canal linking the Nile River to the Red Sea. This wasn't a weekend DIY project. It was a massive undertaking that took years and a labor force that would put any modern construction crew to shame. Why bother with a canal, you ask? Simple. It opened a maritime route that connected the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean, transforming Persia into a global trade hub. The economic implications were as vast as the canal itself, boosting commerce and ensuring that Persian coffers jingled with the sweet sound of prosperity. But let's not get carried away with the romantic notion of Darius as some ancient Barb the Builder. These infrastructural feats were as much about control as they were about commerce. Roads and canals weren't just lifelines for trade. They were arteries through which the empire's lifeblood flowed, taxes, troops, and information. It was all part of Darius's grand strategy to stabilize his sprawling empire, ensuring that every satrapy was just a courier pigeon away. Now, while Darius was busy with his construction projects, he kept an eye on the horizon, where a certain group of city-states was causing a ruckus. Yep, we're talking about Greece, that rocky collection of fiercely independent polities that refused to play nice with the Persian giant. Darius's attempts to reel in these rebellious Greeks were a mix of ambition and exasperation, like trying to herd cats with a fishing net. The Ionian revolt around 499 BCE was the spark that ignited Persian interest in Greece. The Ionians, backed by Athens, were like the loud neighbors who refused to turn down the music, and Darius was the grumpy landlord ready to evict. The revolt was eventually quelled, but not without leaving a bitter taste in Darius's mouth. Athens had thrown down the gauntlet, and Darius was more than ready to pick it up. Cue the Persian Wars, a saga that reads like an epic poem, complete with battles, betrayals, and the occasional deus ex machina. Darius's first major campaign against Greece came in 490 BCE at the Battle of Marathon. Spoiler alert, it didn't go as planned. The Athenians, with their hoplites and phalanxes, handed Persia a defeat that echoed through history like a particularly loud clap of thunder. The loss at Marathon was a reminder that even the mightiest empires can stumble, especially when faced with determined foes on their own turf. But Darius was nothing if not persistent. While his Greek campaigns were a mixed bag of victories and setbacks, they set the stage for future conflicts that would shape the course of Western civilization. The Persian-Greek tensions were like a simmering pot waiting to boil over, and Darius's efforts were just the beginning of a long and complex relationship between East and West. As we sift through the debris of these ancient battles, it's easy to get caught up in the romance of the noble Greeks versus the mighty Persians. But let's not forget the less glamorous realities. For the Greeks, these wars were as much about survival as they were about freedom. For Darius, they were about maintaining control and expanding influence. The stakes were high, and the consequences far-reaching, impacting trade, culture, and the very fabric of ancient geopolitics. Turning away from the battlefield, let's assess the legacy of Darius I, a ruler whose reign was as multifaceted as a diamond. On one hand, he was a visionary who expanded the empire's infrastructure, minted coins that fueled an economic boom, and established a bureaucratic system that was the envy of the ancient world. On the other, he was a ruler who wielded power with a mix of diplomacy and dominance, understanding that sometimes peace was simply the calm before the next storm. Darius's achievements were monumental, but they weren't without their shadows. The empire he helped build was a tapestry of cultures and peoples, each with their own desires and grievances. Maintaining harmony was a juggling act, and Darius was the ringmaster trying to keep all the balls in the air. His reign was marked by revolts and rebellions, reminders that not everyone was content under Persian rule. Yet, for all the challenges, the early Persian Empire under Darius was a beacon of administrative brilliance in a world often defined by chaos and conquest. It was a testament to the power of infrastructure, commerce, and governance, a complex machine that required constant maintenance and adjustment. Darius understood that an empire's true strength lay not in its armies, but in its ability to adapt and endure. As we wrap up this tale of the Persian Empire's rise, we're left with a legacy that's as compelling as it is contradictory. The achievements of Cyrus, Cambyses, and Darius laid the foundations for an empire that would influence the ancient world and beyond. Their stories remind us that history is never black and white. It's a kaleidoscope of ambition, innovation, and the eternal struggle for power. So, as you drift off to sleep, ponder the lessons of the Persian Empire. Consider the roads and canals, the coins and conquests, the myths and realities. Remember that history is a tapestry woven from the threads of human endeavor, and each story, no matter how ancient, holds a mirror to our own world. The Persian saga may have ended, but its echoes continue to resonate, reminding us that the pursuit of empire is a journey as old as time itself. And with that, dear listener, we bid farewell to Darius, to Persia, and to the timeless dance of history.